competitor number 7, Kevin Levrone.
He looks great.
The Maryland Muscle Machine, the winningest pro bodybuilder in the history of this sport.
But look at the physique this man brought.
Kevin is nothing short of amazing.
I wanted to quit bodybuilding when I looked at what he looked like.
Kevin Levrone has the best genetics of all time. If he would have actually trained, he would have been the most successful bodybuilder of our time.
Am I insane to even think that I...
The late racing and automotive pioneer Enzo Ferrari once said, "No one remembers who took second place." This statement holds very true for not just racing, but most sports and competitive events. In an art as niche as bodybuilding, this is especially true. If I asked even a casual bodybuilding fan if they could name the last 5 Olympia runner-ups, they'd probably have to stop and think about it. And if I asked them to name 10, it would be significantly harder. And the further we go back, the harder that task becomes. However, in the course of bodybuilding history, there have been a select few runner-ups whose placings were so controversial that they were declared what is commonly known in the bodybuilding community as uncrowned Mr. Olympias. Competitors who came up short of an Olympia title but were more than deserving of one. Whether it be due to being surpassed by a rapidly developing up-and-comer, being in the midst of a dominant champion in their prime, or just blatant robbery, there have been a few notable cases of perennial Mr. Olympia competitors who in another era or different circumstances would have absolutely won a Mr. Olympia title. But no other competitor embodies the reputation of an uncrowned Mr. Olympia than Kevin Levrone, so much so that his legacy earned him the nickname of the uncrowned king of the Mr. Olympia. Through his record 4 Olympia runner-ups, an improbable late career transformation and comeback, he has rightfully earned the reputation as one of bodybuilding's all-time greats, and his legacy is and has always been undeniable. But to better understand what makes Kevin Levrone the king of uncrowned Mr. Olympias, we need to take a look at how it all began. Kevin Mark Levrone was born July 16, 1964 in Baltimore, Maryland to a Sicilian-American father and African-American mother. The Levrones had 6 children, with Kevin being the youngest of all of them. According to Kevin, his father and mother had a strong and loving marriage, built on respect. Kevin recalls his father always treating his mother well, giving Kevin an early impression on what a man is supposed to be and how he's supposed to act. His father was an instrumental part of Kevin's early development, because his presence and role within the family unit allowed for Kevin and his siblings to maintain a certain level of security. However, before he could even begin to understand the world, Kevin's innocence would be stripped away and his reality forever altered.
I didn't have a father growing up, unfortunately. It was 6 of us. My mother had to raise 6 kids by herself. I was the youngest. We were 2 years apart. He died from cancer.
In 1975, at the age of 10 years old, Kevin's father would pass away from cancer, devastating his entire family, especially his mother, as she now had the responsibility of raising 6 children by herself, a feat that is too often overlooked. His father's burial was just days before Christmas. According to Kevin, his father's death changed him in many ways. For starters, he became more introverted and withdrawn. It was like something changed in him and warped his perception of the world, a well-known effect of childhood trauma. He became a lot more reclusive and preferred isolation over the company of people. His father's death also led to a lot of childhood bullying, as kids in school would bully him for not having a dad, leading him to dreading going to school. However, another effect of Kevin's father's passing was forcing him down a path of self-discovery. The death of any beloved family member is an event that will forever alter someone's life. So for a 10-year-old Kevin who was grief-stricken at the most important intellectual development period in life, he had to find a way to cope. So he sought out outlets to not only better understand himself, but learn how to regulate his emotions. When Kevin turned 11, he got into karate and studying martial arts. Delving into the ideologies of Bruce Lee and energy, Kevin began his journey of self-mastery and breaking down mental barriers and limitations.
You push it out, but all the time you are keeping the continuity going. Bending, stretching, everything. Through them, you see, the idea is running water never grows stale. So you got to just keep on flowing.
He also began exploring meditation in his early teen years as a means of mastering self-control and calming his mind. Kevin had to grow up very quickly, because the reality of his situation forced him to have to understand very early on how precious life was, creating within him a sense of urgency to have to make something of himself, and an attitude and approach of maximizing his efforts to the extreme, a principle that would stick with him throughout his entire bodybuilding career. Now, as he was becoming a scholar on Bruce Lee's teachings and principles, Kevin would find himself inspired to look into another discipline. It would be a fateful reunion with his cousin who was in the military service that would pique Kevin's interest in bodybuilding. At this point, his cousin Stoning had just come from completing his military service in the Marine Corps and would shock Kevin with his impressive transformation. He had put on some serious muscle and was a lot leaner and more vascular than he ever was at 6'5", 264. Kevin was mesmerized, so mesmerized that he likened his cousin to the Incredible Hulk, and from that point on, developed an interest in being just like him. By the time Kevin got to high school, he was a fitness addict. His older brother always had weights around the house, and he had a weight room at school, so he'd get a session in whenever he had free time in school, and then come home and work out some more. He just wanted to be around other people who wanted to train as hard as he did, and he was quickly developing a love for it. Continuing to feel the residual effects of his father's passing made Kevin take his health more seriously. While his father died of causes that were beyond his control, Kevin wanted to mitigate what was in his control, and wanted to stay active to fight off any health issues he could avoid. Over the next several years, Kevin continued training and building his physique, and with each new milestone came one more ounce of confidence. He loved putting in the work and seeing the results, as well as finding new ways to continuously challenge himself. Kevin's dedication to building muscle and improving his physique led him to naturally delve into bodybuilding. At this point, he was in his early 20s and had been meaning to scratch that itch. Studying Bruce Lee's methodologies while having adopted a different outlook on life gave him the mindset to be able to dive into bodybuilding headfirst, ready and willing to devote himself to the art, and doing everything it took to win. So, at the age of 25, Kevin Levrone would embark on his journey to becoming one of the world's best bodybuilders, right before the dawn of bodybuilding's greatest era. Kevin Levrone would compete for the very first time not in bodybuilding, but powerlifting. He competed at the 1989 Mr. Colossus powerlifting meet where he weighed in at 186 and bench pressed 405 pounds.
I have a powerlifting background. I actually went to a powerlifting show and I won when I was 168 pounds, at the Mr. Colossus show in Baltimore. I was 186. I bench pressed 405 pounds.
While not necessarily feeling that passion for powerlifting, he decided to spend the next year developing his physique further so he can get ready to step on stage. As in 1990, the bodybuilding world would be introduced to Kevin Levrone for the very first time when he stepped on stage at the 1990 Maryland State Championships, where he not only won his class, but the overall as well. Kevin was far and away more impressive than almost any amateur that was put next to him at only 206 pounds. This highlighted an it factor that very few rising bodybuilders have, but before he knew it, a young Kevin Levrone was on his way to the national stage, a test that would really reveal how valid his it factor was. However, right as Kevin's bodybuilding career was starting to ramp up, tragedy would strike once again. In 1990, Kevin's mother would pass away from cancer, never getting the opportunity to see his bodybuilding career through.
The things that happened in my life that got me to this point of where I'm at now is almost like a puzzle, because my mother died and she had cancer, and then I got into the nutritional part of taking care of my body, and I joined the gym because I wanted to be physical fit. That's what drove me when I went to the gym.
Having experienced this type of trauma before didn't make the loss any easier, as Kevin and his mom had been each other's rock since the passing of his father, and now he had to endure the pain all over again. Her passing in a similar fashion to his father's forced Kevin to have to look at life in a different perspective. He had lost both of his parents at a young age, making mortality something that he was more familiar with than he would have liked. However, he had to find a greater meaning behind it all. He had to find a purpose in that grief. If his mother's passing did anything for Kevin, it was the reminder to not take life for granted and to make the most of every moment. So from that point forward, the fire that Kevin already had for competing would burn 10 times harder, as he had channeled that grief into a relentless pursuit of an IFBB Pro card. And that pursuit would start at the 1991 NPC Junior Nationals. Kevin competed in the heavyweight class, and at the age of 27, was an absolute freakazoid on stage. The 1991 Junior National class marked the beginning of what many consider to be the greatest era in bodybuilding. And in retrospect, it doesn't take too close of a look to figure out why. It was a testament to the insane level of competition and standard for bodybuilding in the early 90s. The size, conditioning, symmetry, and proportion that all these competitors had back then was something that is rarely replicated today. It was a different level, and Kevin's package exemplified exactly why. Sporting a bun, Kevin stepped on the Junior National stage with a package and aura that could only be described as Herculean. Kevin seemed to have drawn inspiration from the gods of Mount Olympus because he more than impressed the bodybuilding world with his physique. For most outside the state of Maryland, this would be their first exposure to the young Kevin Levrone, and it didn't take a purist to see why he turned heads at this show. At 5'11", he not only had an imposing frame, but had the muscle tissue to fill it out. His conditioning and color were excellent, which enhanced by that old school downlighting, made not just him, but the rest of the competitors on stage look statuesque. Now, believe it or not, Kevin did not win this show. He came in second in the heavyweight class to budding star Paul DeMeo. However, it was undeniable that not only was he the most complete bodybuilder on stage, but the most charismatic. He carried with him an aura and presence of someone who lived and breathed bodybuilding. The work was on the physique. In every striation, line, vein, it was clear as day that Kevin was more than deserving of being up there with that caliber of talent. If there was any example of owning the stage, it would be his 1991 Junior Nationals package. But this would be far from the last. In fact, Kevin's stage presence would be a trait he'd master for years to come. Following Junior Nationals, Kevin went on to compete at the 91 NPC Nationals in what was widely considered to be the greatest amateur bodybuilding class in history. A talented class that would forecast the meteoric growth of the sport over the course of the next decade.
And now we move to Kevin Levrone from Glen Burnie, Maryland.
Now, to me, he looks just a tad sharper than he did the last time I saw him. Look at this. He cut his hair. He cut his hair, too, right? He looks great.
Kevin didn't just get to go up against reigning junior national champion Paul DeMeo once again, but Flex Wheeler, Ronnie Coleman, and Chris Cormier, all competitors that would go on to achieve legend status. This was peak bodybuilding for the time and represented a clear shifting of eras that had everyone more than excited. Kevin brought an improved package from Junior Nationals, having made a few changes and modifications to his diet, as well as the length that he was dieting for, allowing him to come in better condition and a lot tighter.
I just wanted to come in this show with the best shape that I possibly could, so I trained on different equipment and did a lot of isolation, you know, for the muscles, high intensity reps, things like that, you know, Stairmaster, riding the bike. Before I didn't do that for the juniors, so, you know, I kind of saved a little best for last, you know.
He had that paper-thin skin, making everything visible, and once again showcased excellent presentation. This show was aired at a time when bodybuilding was popular enough to get an ESPN slot. The Olympia, the Arnold, and Nationals were aired on ESPN at the height of bodybuilding's mainstream appeal. This didn't just get Kevin, Flex, and Ronnie in front of the biggest audience possible, but only served to motivate aspiring competitors to train hard enough to one day be on that stage as well. At the end of the finals, Matt Mendenhall would place 5th, Ronnie Coleman would place 4th, Paul DeMeo in 3rd, leaving Kevin and Flex Wheeler as the last two men standing. Flex was a veteran by comparison, competing in his 7th show versus Kevin's 4th. Now, despite Flex having amazing symmetry, Kevin's fullness, size, and structure was just far too overwhelming.
Levrone from Glen Burnie, Maryland, is the heavyweight winner.
Wow. Tough call.
And just like that, 3 years into his bodybuilding career, Kevin was officially an IFBB pro, and from that point forward, the biggest new name on the open bodybuilding pro circuit.
This year at the Junior Nationals, the judges saw fit to vote Paul DeMeo over Kevin Levrone. Well, Kevin, how did it turn out this time?
Well, like I said earlier, Carl, I went back and I trained hard and I dieted a little longer this time. And I more or less prepared for this so that I would peak out at this contest. And I think at this show I was definitely at my best.
Hi, I'm Kevin Levrone, the guy who came out of no heavyweight and overall title at the NPC Nationals with inhuman size and symmetry. One of my freaky body parts I used to dominate that show was my arms, which right now measure well over 22 inches. I didn't build them with fancy machines and long routines, just a lot of heavyweight and hard work. So if you're ready to grow, follow me and let's pump up the volume.
The 1992 year was a pivotal year in the changing of the guard for bodybuilding, because the 91 Olympia saw young Dorian Yates give 8-time Mr. Olympia Lee Haney a serious run for his money. And with Lee Haney deciding to retire after the 91 Mr. Olympia, 1992 was sure to see a new champion crowned. And with that crowning, a brand new era of bodybuilding.
I felt I had to up something because I was a little bit more experienced, but I didn't want to fight him again. That was enough fighting for Dorian.
After earning his pro card, Kevin wasted absolutely no time before diving headfirst into the most competitive shows that the IFBB had to offer. Contrary to the norm for bodybuilders today, Kevin's early IFBB run in preparation for the Mr. Olympia was an absolute gauntlet. He made his pro debut at the 1992 Chicago Pro Invitational, where he stacked up very well against the best of the IFBB. He was up against a stacked class of competitors which included some big names like Milo Sarchev, Bob Paris, Darren Charles, and much more. This lineup was 19 competitors deep, a testament of how hungry most of these athletes were in the early 90s. Everyone wanted to be the next Mr. Olympia, and the race was absolutely on. Despite coming in shape, Kevin couldn't take down Porter Cottrell and Terry Pastel as they placed first and second respectively, putting Kevin in third. Certainly not bad for an IFBB debutant. Just 1 week later in New York, he went on to compete at one of the most illustrious shows the IFBB has to offer, the 1992 Night of Champions. Kevin came into the show much improved with his eyes on first place. This Night of Champions show featured yet another stacked class of 29 competitors, a number that is almost unheard of in modern bodybuilding, even for a show like the Mr. Olympia, making his victory and triumph over Porter Cottrell and Terry Pastel even more gratifying. According to Kevin, this was one of his toughest nights as a competitor, as he was so depleted that he genuinely felt like he was gonna die. He had come in a little drier and a lot leaner. So lean that he was down to 2.7% body fat. This, combined with his crazy full muscle bellies, enhanced his overall freak factor. And at the end of the show, he'd be crowned the winner and would nab his first pro victory, officially marking the arrival of Kevin Levrone. It would be after the 1992 Night of Champions that Peter McGough of Muscular Development would dub him the Maryland Muscle Machine. A massive win in his debut gave Kevin the perfect amount of momentum heading into the Mr. Olympia, which was just a few weeks away. He went from being an underdog to a legitimate contender in the eyes of many. However, there was one big, actually massive obstacle in his way in Dorian Yates. Coming off of his 91 Olympia runner-up, Dorian Yates wasn't even close to his prime. He had made his own arrival in the bodybuilding world after years of his name buzzing around the industry. His first few sightings by the bodybuilding world had everyone sure that he was going to be the next big thing, and after the 91 Olympia, he had proven that to be the case. So the Brit would be Kevin's biggest adversary, but with the mass, shape, and conditioning of Levrone, a lot of people weren't ready to count him out. With bodybuilding having exploded in popularity, opening the floodgates for new top-tier competitors, the anticipation for the 92 Mr. Olympia would be the highest of any Olympia yet.
When I prepare for a contest, I go on a strict diet. I do everything the same all the way up to the show. So therefore, a week out from the contest, I'm looking almost like I want to look the day of the show. I think that a lot of competitors, when they do certain things like this, they're really taking a chance. You know, it has been proven that the majority of the guys do have it down, but most of them, some of them, you know, are still experimenting. So I don't like to really experiment with anything. I like to go in a contest knowing that how I'm going to look 2 or 3 days out.
September 12, 1992 would be the biggest day in bodybuilding that year, as 22 of the best bodybuilders in the world would square off, including bodybuilding legend Lou Ferrigno, who was making his comeback after a 17-year hiatus. But the biggest story of this show was Dorian Yates, who came in significantly improved from his first showing in 91. Having already been the frontrunner, he put down the notion of any other competitor taking that title except him, because Dorian was completely on, especially with his dense muscle tissue. The combination of that granite hard look combined with his impressive conditioning made it very difficult for the judges to not be looking his way, which is a shame because Kevin looked damn good at 236 pounds. So good that the judges had him beating some of the best competitors in the IFBB in his Olympia debut. A feat that was extremely rare, especially in the most competitive era of bodybuilding. He was the best he had been up until that point in his career, and clearly far ahead of the rest of the competition, just not Dorian Yates. In the end, Dorian would be crowned the new Mr. Olympia champion, and the first one from the United Kingdom at that.
Take that $50,000 check and give it to Kevin Levrone.
But Kevin was far from disappointed, because his expectations weren't that high to begin with, but to leap the rest of the field so quickly was definitely a dream come true for him. Now, the changing of the guard in bodybuilding had just happened, and a brand new era on the horizon, an era that would eventually be known as the Mass Monster era. While Kevin had been inspired by the bodybuilders of the golden era, the era he was about to be a part of would be very different. See, it's no secret that over time, athletes and competitors alike evolved to a different level, leaving their predecessors and their accomplishments in the dust. And bodybuilding would be no different. The only question was, how different would this new era look? Based on how bodybuilding had been evolving in just the first 2 years of the 90s, it was definitely looking like the newer crop of talent would be gifted with some of the best genes bodybuilding had ever seen. And Kevin was an absolute embodiment of that. This can be exemplified in Peter McGough's article on musculardevelopment.com, reminiscing on his friendship with Kevin. And this friendship started with him witnessing Kevin's genetic advantage firsthand. McGough recounts in his article, "In New York, I only had the briefest of pleasantries with this new wonder kid, and in an Olympia preview, I predicted he would be 7th. My next sighting of him was 48 hours prior to the 1992 Olympia being staged on September 12th in Helsinki, Finland. There he was, striding through the Marina Hotel restaurant, cracking jokes, and glad-handing fans and press alike, pinching a french fry here and a piece of cheesecake there. Combined with his full jowls and his sociability, I immediately assessed he was not ready, was too relaxed. He should be holed up in his room like the other 1992 Olympians, concentrating on the tribulations to come. Later that day, when the 27-year-old purred into my tape recorder, I'll be happy with the judge's decision whether they place me 1 through 10. It was verification that he knew he hadn't peaked and would be quite content to settle into a lower top 10 finish. The morning of the contest, he swapped dressing room banter with Dorian Yates and Steve Brisbois, almost acting as if he was just hanging out with the guys. However, I had to admit, his face wasn't as cherubic as it had been 2 days earlier. And then he rumbled out of the prejudging, and all 7th place bets were off. With a face more sunken than Davy Jones' locker, thighs containing deeper cuts than the Republican budget, and deltoids more spectacular and eye-catching than the epaulets of a third-world dictator, the French fry predator of 48 hours ago in his Big O debut stormed to 2nd place, just 1 berth from being Lee Haney's Mr. Olympia successor, only a Dorian Yates away from a Sandow. The enigma of Kevin Levrone had materialized. I smiled, laughing at myself. McGough, you've been around the block a few times, but this new kid on the block sure fooled you. McGough's account is likely not a unique one, as most fans and pundits didn't foresee Kevin improving as rapidly as he had been. But just like that, he was at the top of the bodybuilding game and on everyone's radar. In the eyes of many, if Dorian wasn't the next dominant champion like Lee Haney, Kevin would be next up. However, that was a very big if. On September 20th, 1992, just days after the Mr. Olympia, Kevin competed at the Germany Grand Prix in Duisburg, Germany, and once again stunned at the show, bringing a package nobody else on that stage could compare to. He'd win easily with Momo Benaziza coming in 2nd. Dorian Yates would also guest pose fresh off of his Olympia victory, reminding Kevin and the rest of the field that despite being the new Mr. Olympia champion, he was going to make sure his presence and aura was felt everywhere, even if he wasn't there. From Germany, he'd take his travels to England to compete at the English Grand Prix, going toe-to-toe with his new rival, Dorian Yates. For most top contenders today, major shows post-Olympia are great confidence boosters and ways to nab some wins across the globe, while also building some momentum for the upcoming season, which they can do because Mr. Olympia focuses strictly on the Mr. Olympia. But Dorian, Lee Haney, and the champions before them didn't just stop at the Olympia. Being Mr. Olympia meant you were the best bodybuilder in the world, and being the best in the world back then meant not just winning that big show, but other major shows where you knew the competition was going to be. Another reason why the caliber of talent in the early 90s had hit an all-time high, because no show was going to be a cakewalk, and every victory would need to be hard fought. And there was no better way for the Mr. Olympia to prove his title as the unquestioned best in the world than to prove it at other events. Now with Kevin and the rest of the field in his backyard, there was no way we wouldn't see the best version of Dorian Yates, which is exactly what he delivered. For the 2nd time in just a couple weeks, Kevin would place 2nd to Dorian, capping off the 1992 season. As 1993 came, it was becoming evident that Dorian Yates was going to be significantly harder to beat than anyone could have imagined, and it was clear. So the rest of the competition had no choice but to grow because the golden era that prioritized aesthetics and shape was over. Dorian Yates was the standard now, and that came with a redefined definition of what an open bodybuilder was: massive and conditioned, and everyone fully understood the assignment and immediately got to work. They started pushing harder, not just with their gear usage, but in the gym as well. And Kevin was no exception, as he'd immediately get back in the gym on the quest to pack on as much muscle mass as possible, an endeavor that he was going to attack with the utmost sense of urgency. This increase in intensity, however, led Kevin to experiencing the first major setback in his bodybuilding career.
I got home from getting 2nd in my first Mr. Olympia. September, went on a tour, I came home, and I tore my chest in February. I was bench pressing, it was cold in the gym. I ripped my chest. I just got home from the tour, tore my chest, bench pressing 600 pounds. I blew out my pectoralis, a major and minor, snapped my tendon.
Yeah.
I was out, done.
In February of 1993, he tear his pec bench pressing 600 pounds, one of the most gruesome injuries a bodybuilder can suffer. This was an absolute nightmare for Kevin, as he had just hit his stride, and his career was just starting to take off. And within a blink of an eye, he now had to shift his focus from taking down Dorian Yates to just being able to get back on stage again that year. He had to undergo a 12-hour surgery that ended up getting infected, causing him to have to go back under the knife 1 week later. The rehab was going to be long and arduous and was going to truly test Kevin's resolve. But as difficult as it could be to imagine, this pec injury presented a silver lining that would change his perspective on his prepping entirely, and subsequently lead him to a big piece of self-discovery. See, as Kevin was forced to lay off strength training for months, he'd naturally begin to atrophy. He had to wither away down to a physique he didn't even recognize, an event that will take a massive toll on any bodybuilder. With his entire livelihood reliant on his physique, the beginning of 1993 marked one of the most stressful periods of his life up until that point. He was so stressed about the injury that he withheld it from the Weeders, fearing that his inability to compete would lose him his contract, and in turn, his main source of revenue.
Lee Haney said, "How'd you do it?" I said, I was doing dumbbells. And I lied. I lied because I was scared. And I didn't want to tell them exactly what happened because I knew that I might lose my contract.
Yeah.
Because no bodybuilder had ever came back from a chest tear and competed and did well.
By the summer of 1993, however, he was medically cleared to get back to training. Now, conventional wisdom would say that getting back in the gym after a major injury like that would warrant a slow and steady progression back to normalcy. However, there was nothing conventional about Kevin Levrone. Down 40 pounds from his off-season weight with a ton of muscle lost and just 3 months away from the 93 Olympia, Kevin decided that there was nothing that would stop him from being on that stage. So, in what would be the most daring and challenging endeavor of his life, he had to put all the muscle he lost in those months back on and still get conditioned enough to present a physique that was at least worthy of being there. So, in Kevin's own words, he went absolutely balls to the wall, pushing the gear and training in a way he had never done before. For the next 3 months, Kevin would live at the gym. He trained multiple times a day with a level of intensity so great that his nose would bleed frequently during sessions. This was the mission of a madman, but if there was anyone that could pull it off, it was him.
I ripped my pec in January, and it wasn't until June to where I could do something in the gym that will make me feel like I'm half of a person.
There was that uncertainty. Would he or would he not be able to come back?
So I did things totally different in the gym that I've never even did before.
Come on, champ, you know what you got to do to win this.
Well, the fact that he got such a good result, well, I put it back and God healed the wounds, but it's strictly a testament to his determination and hard work to the kind of result that he got.
As the show was underway, it was clear that Kevin was not at his best conditioning and was severely lacking relative to what he had brought in 1992. But unbeknownst to a lot of people at the time, given the circumstances, he had managed to bring a more than formidable package in 93, good enough to keep him in the top 10, something that he didn't even think was going to happen. See, Kevin knew going in that he wasn't going to be in contention for the title, but what he didn't think would happen was him still being competitive. So, to maintain his lines and muscularity at the 93 Olympia was a massive accomplishment, regardless of where he placed. Sean Ray and Flex Wheeler would battle with Dorian for the title in the finals, and neither of them were a match, because Dorian Yates once again brought something to the Olympia that bodybuilding had never seen before. He was noticeably bigger, 260 pounds in fact, but it was his insane conditioning with that mass that was unbelievable. An entire year's worth of effort for the entire IFBB to try to catch up to him, just for Dorian Yates to be 3 steps ahead. The reality that everyone now had to accept was that the IFBB had clearly found its next generational talent, because so long as Dorian Yates kept pushing the bounds of what the human body could do, the more people would keep watching. Kevin would place fifth at this Olympia, the worst placing of his career thus far.
Take the check and the certificate to Kevin Levrone. Sean Wright. Silver Sandow medal being given by George Shahuni of Powerhouse. Flex Week. Of $100,000.
Now, while Flex and Sean were dealing with the disappointment of coming so close, Kevin was absolutely elated. Because despite regressing in terms of placings, he had just discovered something about himself that would mean trouble for the rest of the IFBB and possibly even Dorian. Kevin was what people in the bodybuilding community call a hyper-responder. This is someone who has the genetic capability of responding significantly better than the average person to steroid usage. This is usually exemplified by a drastic increase in muscle and strength in a very short period of time. The average bodybuilder at that time was lucky to be able to put on 25 pounds of muscle in a year-long offseason. Kevin accomplished that within a 3-month prep, on a caloric deficit at that, validating to him that he was in fact an absolute freak, something which didn't come as a surprise to most people around him. This realization, however, was the first time Kevin would truly know what he was capable of. So he figured that if 3 months was all it took to get him to 80% of his maximum capability, all he really needed was 4 months total to get ready for the Mr. Olympia. No extended off-season necessary. So long as he went absolutely ballistic in the short amount of time that he had, he knew he could still go out there and beat the best that the IFBB had to offer. This also allowed Kevin to maintain some semblance of balance in life, as he'd be able to shift his focus to his business ventures and other interests during this down period. So with this revelation, there was no stopping Kevin Levrone.
I do believe that was a blessing in disguise when I tore my pec, because at that point, I had to step back, and I also realized when I stepped back that I didn't need, to train and push my body like that all year round to get to a level to compete. I just could do it in 4 months. I had to get in that Olympia, and I had to walk on that stage, and I had to let them people know, that, hey, this is it. I walked out on that stage after 8 months after ripping my pec.
After the Olympia, he'd embark on his tour of Europe, grinding out as many shows as he could while simultaneously getting to travel and seeing what the rest of the world had to offer. France would be his first stop, as he'd compete at the French Grand Prix, placing 3rd. From there, he'd make a stop in Finland for the Finnish Grand Prix, where he'd place 2nd. He'd then head over to Spain for the Spanish Grand Prix, where he'd place 3rd. Then back to Germany, where he'd win his first show since the Germany Grand Prix the previous year. This late-year grind was an absolute gauntlet, but one that Kevin knew was necessary if he was going to get back to form. That multiple-month layoff of 93 made his itch to compete multiply, and he felt that he needed to make up for lost time. If the 93 Mr. Olympia was an indicator that Dorian Yates would come back better, and if Kevin was going to beat him, he would need to go to depths that he had never been to, not just in his training, but mindset as well. Now, this gauntlet didn't end in 93, as in 1994, he'd shortly hop on a plane back to Europe to compete at the French and Italy Grand Prix, where he'd dominate both shows and finish in first once again. Kevin was on an absolute tear and looked completely unstoppable, with each victory validating his claim as the #1 contender for the crown. So, there was no better way for Kevin to make a statement than at the Arnold Classic.
It's the Arnold Schwarzenegger Bodybuilding Classic. It's here today at Vets Memorial in Columbus, Ohio. And I gotta tell you, folks, it's bigger than ever before. People are coming from everywhere.
That's right. The Arnold Classic is huge. It's even bigger than me. People are coming here by foot, by train, by plane, by bus, and even by helicopter. Me, I come with my favorite vehicle in the world, because this is the only car that can guarantee me a very special parking space. Watch. You see, this is a very big bodybuilding competition, the biggest in the world. I mean, you want to see huge arms? Wait when you see the gigantic arms of Vince Taylor. You want to talk mass? Wait when you see Paul Dillette. He's an absolute monster. Or you want to talk about compact? Flavio Paccianini, 4'11", 0 body fat. You see, this is the cream of the crop. That's why I want you to stay here right with me. No flipping channels, no Saturday afternoon movies, not even mine. Just watch this show. Otherwise I get mad. Believe me.
At this point, the Arnold was only 5 years old, but had quickly established a reputation as one of, if not the most illustrious shows outside the Mr. Olympia, mainly due to the weight of Arnold's influence and legend. So if there was any momentum builder, it would be nabbing a win at the Arnold Classic.
Here's the very talented Kevin Levrone, who last year made an amazing comeback from injury and adversity.
In Ultimate Who's Who of Bodybuilding, all the Arnold Classic needed was a red carpet to roll out for that lineup. It was easily the most competitive show Kevin would compete in since the '93 Olympia, so winning it would definitely not be easy. Aside from Kevin, that lineup featured Vince Taylor, Porter Cottrell, Chris Cormier, Andreas Munzer, and Lee Priest, just to name a few. But with the lights shining brighter than ever, Kevin wasn't fazed. He delivered his best package to date and brought that razor-sharp conditioning that he was becoming known for.
Look at his deltoid muscles and his arm muscles from the back. See, the trick here is that to show to the judges within a short period of time that you have your back developed as well as your front, regardless if you talk about the back development or the arm development of deltoids. It has to look impressive from the front and from the back.
Now we come to final two.
And Kevin, who do you vote for?
Kevin Levrone and Vince Taylor.
The second place winner is Vince Taylor.
37-year-old Vince Taylor, one of the popular figures in bodybuilding, is the second place finisher. And with that finish comes a check for $45,000. And that means that Kevin Levrone from Glen Burnie, Maryland, is the new champion of the Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic.
The Maryland Muscle Machine was officially back, and there was no doubt that he was better than he had ever been. And by the end of the finals, Kevin would be given his first ever Arnold Classic trophy.
Me winning this contest means a lot to me, Arnold. I waited a long time to wait to do your contest, especially after the injury. I wanted to get here last year, but I couldn't make it, so I had to go back to the drawing board and train harder and come back. It also, winning the Arnold Classic gives me an opportunity to further my career. I'm involved with a lot of charity work, you know, helping kids and everything, and this title definitely helped me be a champion in their eyes as well.
Yes, Kevin Levrone had just scored a $90,000 paycheck at the Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic, but he wasn't through yet. He stayed ripped to the bone for one more week and stole the show in San Jose. Kevin is probably the only pro bodybuilder to ever win a contest after tearing his chest, which makes his achievement this spring that much more impressive.
Kevin would carry that momentum to another dominant victory at the San Jose Pro Invitational. Now, with the Olympia not too far away, Kevin had to get back into his balls-to-the-wall mindset and achieve what he couldn't the year before. If he could manage a 5th place placing with such little preparation, what could he do with a little more time? That would be revealed at the 1994 Mr. Olympia. As the 1994 Mr. Olympia arrived, the anticipation for how the show would play out was absolutely palpable. The big story, of course, revolved around Dorian Yates, as had been the case over the last few years, but for a couple different reasons than most would assume. While Dorian did come in noticeably bigger than the year before, his conditioning was lacking slightly, as well as his symmetry, because there was a glaring issue in some of his front poses. Dorian's left bicep was visibly smaller than the right one, due to a bicep tear that he suffered 6 weeks out from the show. Overall, this wasn't the best package that Dorian had brought to the Olympia stage. Meanwhile, Kevin had came in better condition and clearly had enough size to hang. He was noticeably bigger than the year before and once again dazzled with his stage presence. However, it wasn't an easy win for Kevin, because the biggest surprise of this show was Sean Ray. See, Sean had been a staple in the IFBB and was entering his 7th Mr. Olympia and hadn't placed outside the top 5 since his rookie year. He was coming off of a 3rd place placing in '93, and he showed up looking to make a statement. He certainly wasn't the biggest guy in the lineup from a muscle mass standpoint. In fact, both Kevin and Dorian dwarfed him on stage. However, he made up for that in every other aspect. He was bone dry, carried amazing symmetry and proportion, and posed his ass off. Sean's total package was arguably the best at this show, even better than Kevin's, which had him clearly gunning for the win with Dorian, something that all of a sudden didn't feel as impossible as a feat given some of Dorian's deficiencies. However, the decision that the judges would make at this Mr. Olympia would determine where bodybuilding would go from here. Sean and Dorian were two diametrically opposed bodybuilders. One was an absolute monster that carried more dense muscle than half the competition, and one was a physique artist that had the perfect balance of every element that made the golden era so special. So what the judges decided to do here would be crucial for the direction of bodybuilding.
Relax. And if the music man is ready, pose down. In third place, a check of $30,000 and a plaque being given by Dr. Scott Connolly of Metrics will be presented to competitor number 8, Kevin Levrone. In second place, a check of $50,000 being presented by Lonnie Willard of Egg Beaters will be given to competitor number 7, Sean Ray.
And just like that, Dorian Yates was now a 3-time Mr. Olympia champion and a destroyer of dreams. The demoralizing nature of this victory can't be overlooked for the rest of the competition, because this was his worst package at the Olympia, having dealt with a setback just before the show, and yet he still managed to beat a veteran who brought his best physique to date. So if there is any indicator that the days of aesthetics and proportions had shifted, it was the '94 Mr. Olympia. And for Kevin and the rest of the competition, there was only one option moving forward: get bigger. The gear usage in bodybuilding was already ramping up significantly at this point, something which put the IFBB in a little bit of a bind with respect to how the art was perceived to the masses. They had attempted to institute drug testing back in 1990 to get bodybuilding into the Olympics, which you can probably guess failed miserably. So by '94, the IFBB's best option was to fully embrace this new era, pushing heavy gear use, which Dorian's victory validated. So for Kevin, it came down to how bad he wanted it and how far he was willing to push his body. And he's gone on to prove there was never a limit and the boundaries were endless. After the '94 Olympia, Kevin continued the tradition of touring Europe post-Olympia, with his first stop being at the Spanish Grand Prix, where he had to go back up against the reigning Dorian Yates, who just came off of another victory, which realistically made him unbeatable at the time. They met once again at the German Grand Prix soon after, where it was the same story, and when the English Grand Prix came, which was Dorian's home turf, he'd hand Kevin his 3rd consecutive second place placing after showing up in dominant fashion, an event that would foreshadow things to come. Now, another event that highlighted Kevin's 1994 was his encounter with the Russian Mafia. See, Russian bodybuilding culture was equally, if not stronger than America's, so naturally, Kevin and the rest of the IFBB would be major stars over there. With that stardom, though, came a little bit of a conflict. Kevin was invited to Russia for an event, which, unbeknownst to him, might have been funded by some not-so-law-abiding citizens, aka mafia members, who just so happened to be bodybuilding fans. So, Kevin went to Russia, did his thing, and was met with a good amount of hospitality. Almost a little too much hospitality though, because as soon as he was ready to depart and leave, the Russian Mafia told him he couldn't. See, they were so enamored and mesmerized by the guy they called the Maryland Muscle Machine that they needed to know what his secret was. They wanted Kevin to not just stay a bit longer, but to teach them his ways and methods, whether he wanted to or not. So for 3 hours, Kevin was harassed and tormented by the Russian Mafia as they'd kept him against his will to do multiple interviews, but luckily for him, he was able to leave the ordeal unscathed.
If I don't win, it's nobody's fault but my own.
As the 1995 season was underway, the thought of Dorian would loom on the minds of not just the entire IFBB, but Kevin especially. because up until this point, he was 0-5 against Dorian, coming in second place to him in all those occasions, with 3 of those losses coming in the last 3 shows. If for any indication, Kevin was clearly Dorian's biggest competition at this point, as he had been the only thing standing in Kevin's way of winning the Olympia title. A storyline and rivalry which became the highlight of the mid-90s bodybuilding scene. Kevin knew he had no choice but to up the ante in all aspects, as Dorian's Shadow nickname and mystique loomed heavy like a giant dark cloud hovering over the IFBB, never knowing what was going to come out of it. What everyone including Kevin did know though was that every year Dorian came back bigger. The only question was, how much bigger was he going to be? The correct assumption was bigger than last year, but nobody knew exactly what he would look like. To Kevin though, that was all unnecessary noise, as he wasn't worried about his placing. He, against all odds, had become one of the top bodybuilders in the world, amassing tens of thousands of fans internationally. So to Kevin, he was still a winner regardless, and consistently made it a point to look at the bright side. But that didn't change his competitive spirit and burning desire to become the Mr. Olympia. So in the lead up to the 1995 Olympia, he'd absolutely kill himself in the gym to make any small improvement he could, all while documenting his progress. Because against Dorian Yates, it all mattered. Every striation, every line, and every vein. This was a man who dieted so hard and got so lean that his feet would hurt just from walking. This was a guy who brought his worst package the year before and still went home with the Sandow. So taking him down would likely be the toughest task that anyone could have in the IFBB at the time. But Kevin was ready to do exactly that. This was heavily documented in his iconic 1995 DVD, Full Blown, which documented Kevin's prep and mindset heading into that Olympia.
Hi, I'm Kevin Levrone, and I'm inviting you to spend the next 3 days in my world, Full Blown, and that's the name of this video.
Time train, baby.
All right, basically, what this thing is all about here, this video is about hardcore training. It's about being psyched, it's about staying positive, and it's about making your dreams come true. And that's why I'm here, that's why I decided to do this video, to help you get from A to B, and hopefully to C. Maybe you can look like me.
Broadcasted on ESPN with some massive sponsors backing it, the 1995 Olympia was the most highly anticipated Olympia at the time. The first call-out during the prejudging saw Dorian Yates at center stage, with Sean Ray and Kevin Levrone on either side of him. Kevin was clearly better than in 94. Exactly what everyone expected given his trajectory. Now, despite bringing a solid package, Sean Ray was swapped out for Nasser El Sambadi, as he didn't have the size to hang with the new direction that bodybuilding was trending towards. Nasser, having been a consistent competitor over the years, clearly had a package worthy of being in that top call-out, especially given his impressive combination of size and conditioning. However, neither him nor Kevin were conditioned enough for Dorian, who somehow, someway, was harder and drier than the two of them by a significantly noticeable margin. It was unreal how grainy and dense Dorian looked underneath that lighting, as he overshadowed the fact that Kevin had also brought his best physique to date in all aspects. It just wasn't enough despite all of his hard work, as Dorian never moved out of the top spot, a result that was a surprise to very few. And in the ultimate display of showmanship, Dorian stayed on stage even after being dismissed by Steve Weinberger to solidify his position as the last man standing and give the fans a show.
And now Nasser comes back. It's turning into a pose down already. And here comes Kevin Levrone and Sean Ray. No doubt every one of these guys thinks they have a shot at the title, and that's why all 4 of them are there posing. Nobody else came by, just those 4 that were called up. And they're probably right.
As the finals rolled around, Kevin presented a stunning posing routine which highlighted his incredible stage presence, something that had become a staple of his package. Pulling an American flag out of his posing trunks near the end was the cherry on top of an amazing presentation that left the audience in awe. This was peak bodybuilding, and Kevin was at a level we had never seen him before. The confirmation round was a parallel of the years past, as Dorian stood at center stage for the entire time because the judges had clearly already made up their mind. Despite seeing the best of Kevin, they also saw the best of Dorian, and that version of Dorian was just not beatable.
And those awards will be given to competitor number 8, Sean Ray. Competitor number 1, Nasser El Sanbadi. Second place, a check of $50,000 being presented by Will and Norm Davish of Powerhouse Gyms. The silver Mr. Olympia medal being given by John Oliva of Twin Lab. The silver Sandow medal being given by Peter Parsons of American Bodybuilding Products. And the certificate being given by Amy Fodley of EAS. And that award goes to competitor number 18, Kevin Levrone.
Kevin had just placed second to Dorian Yates for the 6th time in his career, which forced him to have to come to terms with the possibility that so long as Dorian was active, he may never win the Mr. Olympia, a thought that bothered him so much that he needed answers from Joe Weider himself. In an effort to get some transparency and insight into why he had consistently been overlooked, he just simply asked Joe Weider directly, "What do I need to do to win?"
And Joe Weider told me before he passed away, and I said, "Joe, how come I can't win?" And he said, "It's not that you're not good enough to win. It's not that Flex Will is not good enough to win, or Sean Ray isn't good enough to win. It's not that, Levrone." He said, "This is a business. But if I take you guys and I shuffle you guys around first, second, or third, I'm still going to make the same amount of money. It's just that you guys are going to be personally rewarded. But I'm going to make the same amount of money if Flex was Mr. Olympia, you, or Sean Ray." But Dorian opens up another whole umbrella, opens up another whole market in his business.
That answer from Joe Weider validated to Kevin what he already knew, which was that the Mr. Olympia title was just as much about business as it was about talent or genetics. This was a well-known and well-accepted fact in bodybuilding for years, primarily highlighted by Arnold's push by the Weiders as the face of international bodybuilding. And Dorian was simply the next man up for his time. His transcendent package brought a freak factor to bodybuilding that had never been seen before, which naturally brought in a lot of eyes, which in turn brought in more cash and even new competitors. Now, as demoralizing as it was to hear from the highest man on the totem pole that you likely weren't going to win, it did give Kevin a different perspective on how he should approach his career moving forward. It gave him a bit of peace and closure in being able to accept the fact that it was in his best interest to focus on the other ways that he could maximize his status as a bodybuilder. Kevin may not have been Mr. Olympia, but he was easily one of the most popular and well-respected bodybuilders in the world at this time, who was already inspiring an up-and-coming generation. So he didn't necessarily need the Mr. Olympia title to make money or gain more success. The name Kevin Levrone alone could generate almost just as much, if not the same opportunities, as Dorian Yates. Understanding that his physique wasn't necessarily what was holding him back, and knowing that he was worthy of the Mr. Olympia title, gave him a sense of gratitude for being able to consistently contend. Regardless of where he placed or where his career ended up, he knew that the only thing he could control was how he maximized his image and brand. So for Kevin, it was on to the next, and back in the lab for his next European gauntlet. Even though he hadn't been able to get the best of Dorian, he was more than capable of beating everyone else. And with so many more shows on the horizon and so much potential prize money to pocket, Kevin was a man on a mission. After the Olympia, he went back to the Spanish Grand Prix, where he beat a stacked class that featured Vince Taylor and a hungry Nasser El Sanbadi. Soon after, he'd go on to dominate basically the same crop of competitors at the '95 German Grand Prix. He then went back into Dorian's backyard, where the Shadow himself would sit this one out. But contrary to Spain and Germany, Kevin wouldn't have it so easy, because while he had already hit his peak, Vince Taylor was about to hit his. He came in perfect condition and shredded to the bone. He had brought his best package ever, one that was more than deserving of the victory. Never the kind to be deterred, he went back to Russia, this time to compete, and got his revenge on Vince Taylor and silenced any talk about him no longer being the #1 contender. This was the perfect way to end the 1995 season, and a reminder that Kevin Levrone was still just hitting his stride. But he wasn't done. He'd go back to the San Jose Invitational in early 1996, where he unsurprisingly dominated the top IFBB pros, including Paul Dillette, Lee Priest, Vince Taylor, and more. Kevin having this dominant run was the exact confidence booster he needed, with each show also serving as side quests on his mission to win the Olympia someday. The fans had gotten used to seeing Kevin win so much. His greatness and trajectory as a future Hall of Famer was becoming more and more undeniable every time he stepped on stage. But having a tenacity unmatched by most, Kevin couldn't slow down as he needed any meaningful victory he could muster with Dorian's status unknown. For all anybody knew, Dorian was in his dungeon continuing to enhance his freak factor, so Kevin promptly jumped back into the Arnold Classic in 1996 to get himself battle ready for another showdown with Dorian that upcoming fall. It was yet another who's who of bodybuilding with heavy hitters in the entire first call-out, Shawn Ray and Flex Wheeler included. However, when we talk about the best package, it was clearly Kevin. His fullness was unmatched, his conditioning was superb, and his stage presence forced everyone to shift their focus to him. Which is saying a lot considering who he was posing against. Kevin had an ability to project in a way that outshined the rest of the lineup, and he did exactly that, which resulted in Kevin Levrone winning his second Arnold Classic.
A check for $45,000 and presenting the Arnold medallion is Jim McPartland from Star Trek, and that goes to Flex Wheeler.
So Kevin Levrone.
Can you believe that? That is spectacular.
Kevin Levrone has won his second Arnold Classic title. Flex Wheeler can't believe it.
It's amazing. The crowd is booing here today because they're not happy with that decision. Okay, thank you, Mike. And we're here with our champion, of course, Kevin. Tell me now, you looked fantastic. Your posing was great. Notice, what did you do different from last year?
I trained a little more intense. I switched my diet around, went back to the drawing board. Each year you set a goal, you set a limitation, and you try to reach it, you know, but this time I try to go beyond that. I was in the gym working out day in and day out, and I think what made a difference is because I opened my new gym, this World's Gym Fitness Center, so it made everything fall into place.
I'll tell you something. When I went to see Kevin Levrone in 1996, he asked me to come down and help him with his prep for the Arnold Classic. I drove down with a friend of mine, a mutual friend we had, and he had 6 weeks before he had sent me pictures, and he looked like he didn't even work out. This kid brought back pictures and showed me because there was no internet then. He actually Polaroids. I said, he's never going to make it. We go down there 6 weeks later, drive down and get into his house. I said, let me see what it looked like. I'm 300 pounds, mind you. Big, freaky, you know. I just won the Junior Nationals. Takes off his shirt. I'm like, that's it. I might as well just quit. I wanted to quit bodybuilding when I looked at what he looked like.
He'd make one more stop at the San Francisco Pro Invitational, where he made light work of the competition once again. Now, the following off-season also saw the recording of the Battle for the Mr. Olympia documentary series, directed by Mitsuru Okabe, a film producer and a bodybuilding fanatic that wanted to document the different level of training taking place across the country at the time, while following the best IFBB pros. Kevin Levrone was featured in this first installment, along with Flex Wheeler, Chris Cormier, Ronnie Coleman, and practically every other relevant pro at the time. This documentary and the footage it contained gave a level of insight into 90s bodybuilding unlike any other piece of media at the time. As GMVbodybuilding.com put it, this is one of the most powerful and hardcore bodybuilding videos of all time.
The Olympia, it's kind of, for me, it's like, you know, the Super Bowl of bodybuilding, you know, so to be considered as one of the favorites going in, you know, it means a lot to me.
I don't talk about Mr. Olympia. Right now, my goal is top 3. And when I say top 3, I mean I'll be in the top 3. If I say Mr. Olympia, I will be Mr. Olympia.
So, if I sound angry or if I sound bitter, I'm not angry and I'm not bitter. Frustrated with the current state and the current judging system they have, yes. that frustration for me turns into power. It fuels each and every one of my workouts. That's why every year, whether I take it on the chin or not, I get up and I come back.
Appreciate all the support of the fans, and hopefully you're not going to be disappointed. Every year I try to beat the Dorian Yates of last year. That's my goal, and hopefully this year's model of Dorian Yates will be even better than last year.
I train hard to win. If I don't win, it's nobody's fault but my own. I just have to train and keep coming back. Better and better.
These videos, however, would not be released to the public until almost a decade later. From this point forward, the rat race for top contender was over. It was clearly Kevin, just like it had been the year before. The only question moving forward was, could this finally be Kevin Levrone's year? There was no one else with more momentum, and he was at the peak of his success. So if there was any time for the IFBB to give Kevin the crown, 1996 had the possibility of being that year. The anticipation for the 96 Olympia, just like the year before, had raised the stakes to another level. The fans were more excited than ever and ready to witness history, regardless of what went down in Chicago. As the prejudging began, there were some very interesting developments reminding fans of the unpredictable nature of bodybuilding. Dorian was vintage Dorian, bigger, drier, harder, and equally as conditioned than in 95. No surprise there. But to those who really paid attention and looked at Dorian with a microscope, they'd notice that his lines were slowly getting blown out a bit, and there was a lot more distension in his midsection than the year before. Either way, he still brought that freak factor that he had been known for. But what the fans didn't expect was Kevin not being the clear contender for second, because his conditioning was a bit lacking and he was holding on to a bit of water, opening the door for Shawn Ray to shock the crowd. Shawn was the biggest surprise of the prejudging, as he had brought a very different package than in previous years. His new bald look wasn't the only thing that he brought to the stage. He was noticeably bigger for the first time in years. It was clear that since the early 90s, Shawn Ray had been reluctant to play the size game to try to win. But after realizing that aesthetics wasn't going to get it done anymore, on top of being hungry to win, he brought a lot more mass that stood out and complemented his package. Shawn wasn't the only surprise though, as there was another IFBB veteran that was finally getting some recognition from the judges. Remember that guy I mentioned earlier, Ronnie Coleman? Well, after not placing in 92, placing 15th in 94, 11th in 95, he not only finally cracked the top 10, but finally got his big break from the judges when they had him in a call-out with Dorian and Shawn. Validation that the young Coleman clearly had potential and was finally figuring out his formula, but he wasn't there yet. Instead, Kevin, Shawn, and Nasser would battle it out in the prejudging for second place, with Dorian clearly the frontrunner for the title once again. In the finals, placings 10 through 7 were announced before the confirmation round, a practice that had become common in the 90s with how impressive those lineups had become. Getting to the Olympia was so difficult with the amount of oversaturation in bodybuilding that a top 10 placing in that era was a massive accomplishment. Now, as the confirmation round began, the judges kept the anticipation going by keeping Dorian on the outside, indicating that they didn't really need to confirm who had won and where the rest of the field would place. So the real question was, who was going to take second?
Kevin Levrone. Receiving a check of $50,000, a certificate to silver Mr. Olympia medal, and the silver Sandow medal. Being presented by Keith Angelin of Metrics, Will Dabish of Powerhouse, Mitchell Barbro of Otomics, and Donald Fisher of Epicure Cream. They will take these awards to the second place winner, Sean Ray.
In a twist of events, Sean Ray had made a large enough improvement to validate a second place placing. He had clearly took his growth to another level and it showed, so the judges had to reward him for that. So to Kevin, he had simply lost to a better bodybuilder. He wasn't razor sharp and it cost him, a stark reminder of how slim the margin of error was against the competition. Ultimately, Kevin couldn't complain or be disappointed. He didn't bring his best, and that was that. All he could do was get better. And deep down inside, he and everyone else knew that he had God-tier genetics and could turn the ship around at any given moment. Remembering what Joe Weider had told him, he made it a point to win every big show he could. So he'd go back on his European tour with the rest of the field as they scrambled to get some wins on their resumes. He'd go back to his routine of hitting Spain, Germany, and England as he had done the past few years. Contrary to 1995 though, Kevin would not run through the competition like he had done before, because he'd place 4th, 3rd, and 4th at each show respectively. Despite the fact that Dorian Yates had joined the rest of the IFBB on the European Grand Prix gauntlet, Kevin had lost to Paul Dillette and Nasser El Sambadi twice while beating Paul only once. He'd fare better at the following Czech Republic Grand Prix, losing only to Nasser as Dorian passed on competing at that show. However, in Switzerland shortly after, Kevin would once again lose to Paul and Nasser, who were both guys he had routinely beaten in the past. The Russian Grand Prix would be even worse for Kevin as he'd finish in 5th place, his worst placing since the 1993 Mr. Olympia. So how was it that Kevin, in seemingly the blink of an eye, was no longer the top contender in the IFBB? Was the competition finally catching up to him? Well, in a way, yes, because by the end of 1996, Kevin no longer had the advantage that he always had in the 90s. He was no longer the fullest guy on stage, as some of the other competitors with bigger frames, specifically Paul and Nasser, had rapidly filled out their frames. The dramatic increase in abusing gear to get as massive as possible had manifested in more competitors catching up to Kevin, and they weren't just getting bigger, they were coming in condition as well. What also didn't help matters was the fact that Kevin's razor-sharp conditioning, something that he had become known for, was not as consistent as it had been in the past. He just couldn't seem to get dialed in for some of these shows, resulting in the most disappointing end of the year for him in a long time. But being no stranger to adversity, Kevin kept pushing in an effort to desperately gain some momentum. With 1997 having arrived and the Arnold Classic on the horizon, Kevin had no choice but to go back and defend his crown, given his winning mindset. Despite the multiple show skid he was on, he was determined to redeem himself. Unfortunately for Kevin, his redemption was over before it could even start. He had brought the worst package of his career against a lineup of guys who were not playing games. The detail and conditioning that these guys brought was peak bodybuilding, and Kevin just couldn't compete. His physique looked tired. He lacked the level of separation we were used to seeing from him, and he was holding on to a lot of water, and just wasn't sharp all around. It was clear that the grind had been taking a toll on him. By the finals, this was more apparent, as each man got to put out their best routines under the spectacle and presentation of the Arnold. And by this point, Kevin was just way too far behind. To see him get beat by so many competitors was a bit of a shock and very uncharacteristic, but exciting for the art of bodybuilding as it opened up a lane for new faces to come in and shake up the standings. Flex Wheeler, who had taken second just the year before, would finally capture that elusive Arnold Classic title that he had been trying so hard to get. Meanwhile, Kevin would slide all the way to 8th place, the worst placing of his entire career.
Wheeler on the right, Nasser El Sambadi on the left.
Nasser El Sambadi,
second place, $45,000. The champion is Flex Wheeler. He has won it again, and total exultation and almost disbelief.
Naturally, the questions around Kevin's career would now mount, as everyone was speculating as to what was going on with Kevin Levrone. With recency bias being so strong that many would start to write him off, Kevin was completely unfazed. He was a veteran at this point and had bounced back from far worse adversity. So getting back to form for him was pretty trivial. After all, this was the guy who came back from a torn pec in 4 months. Kevin getting back in the lab to make an Olympia push was as simple to him as drinking water. So balls to the wall it would be on the road towards the 97 Mr. Olympia. This would once again be documented in Okabe's second installment of his documentaries, The Battle for the Olympia in 1997, which once again saw the top IFBB pros preps heading into the Olympia and the insane competitive drive they carried with them, not just in the gym, but in the posing room and even at home. If there was anything that documentary proved, it was that bodybuilders of the 90s were truly a different breed, and any one of them would be worthy of carrying the title of Mr. Olympia. The 97 prejudging saw a first call-out that included Dorian Yates, Nasser El-Somebody, and Kevin Levrone. Reigning champion Dorian Yates had clearly followed the trend of coming back bigger, but he wasn't clearly better. See, after years of continuing to push the envelope in the size game, his physique started to see the repercussions. His midsection was completely distended, his separation was lacking in a few areas like his legs, and that left bicep was clearly still disproportionate to the right. This was the first time in Dorian's reign that there were some clear and obvious chinks in his armor that made him very vulnerable on stage. Nasser and Sean would meet him in that first call-out, and while they were never going to outmuscle Dorian, they brought enough of all the other components to take a little bit of attention away from him. Now, in the second round of the first call-out, Sean would be replaced with Paul Dillette, who the judges thought had brought a good enough package to at least get a look next to the champ. The other man who remained, however, was Nasser El-Somebody. His fullness, muscularity, conditioning, and presentation was the highlight of the prejudging. To many, he was clearly the best bodybuilder on stage and had brought a package worthy of being the Mr. Olympia. Now, his improvement in itself was not a surprise, as he had been improving for years. It was the level of his improvement combined with Dorian's regression in his overall package that had everyone talking in the prejudging about a potential new champion. Sean Ray eventually got a look as well and replaced Paul for the third slot, basically solidifying the top two as Dorian and Nasser, with Sean in the lead for third, which meant that barring some drastic improvement by the finals, Kevin Levrone would find himself outside the top three. This wasn't what we were used to seeing from Kevin, but it was still an improvement nonetheless. While it would have been the best redemption arc for Kevin to come back from his worst placing and push Dorian for the title, Nasser and Sean were just absolutely on point in every aspect in the finals. And the fact that they came back a lot better from the prejudging also didn't help Kevin. Ultimately, it was already decided long before the finals posed down. Regardless of where Kevin placed, what he presented on stage was an example of positive regression and a sign of things to come. The story now was whether or not Nasser El-Somebody was going to be able to pull off the upset of the century.
Nasser El-Somebody.
Boos rang all over the Terrace Theater, as fans were clearly not pleased by the decision, and neither was Nasser. He had just brought his best package, and one that most agreed was more than worthy of the win, and the judges still gave the nod to Dorian. This placing was one of the most, if not the most, controversial in Olympia history at the time. While the judges had steered bodybuilding in the direction of size over everything, people started to wonder whether or not that was still reasonable criteria if all the other aspects of the physique weren't up to par. The conversations after the show were interesting, as many people started to wonder what direction bodybuilding was going in, especially when a blatant robbery happens right in front of their eyes. But to most competitors, this was par for the course, as none of them were blind to the political nature of bodybuilding. While some competitors sulked and complained, Kevin had tuned out the noise and focused strictly on getting back into his groove. He was still working towards reaching his normal form, which would happen on his European tour at the end of 1997. Kevin's timing for the 97 Olympia was clearly just off, as he'd start his peak post-Olympia at the Hungary Grand Prix, where he brought one of, if not the most impressive packages to date and made a massive statement. Kevin, in an Olympia rematch against the top contenders minus Sean Ray, easily stole the show in what seemed like the blink of an eye. And in the process, he reminded everyone of who he was.
3, Nasser El-Sombody. And the winner, competitor number 7, Kevin Levrone.
He'd continued this streak in Spain, Germany, England, the Czech Republic, and Finland, where he was snatching souls and collecting first-place medals like it was going out of style. He was looking absolutely unstoppable and had won 5 consecutive shows, the longest win streak of his career. Kevin's resurgence was just a reminder of the unpredictable nature of bodybuilding and why top contenders should never be counted out, because they made it to the top for a reason. His win streak would end in Russia, as Ronnie Coleman would spoil what would have been a perfect end to 1997 for Kevin. And it was all because Kevin gave Ronnie some vodka.
We were in Russia one time and he came to me, and I'd won everything, 6 straight shows. Well, I was placing like 4th and 5th, in every show, because I was kind of like burnt out for the most part, from doing all those shows anyway. I did the Olympia, I did the show before the Olympia, so I was kind of like burnt out, but I remember Kevin is winning every show, and I'm like, what the hell is he doing to win all these shows? Just chilling, not just one show. They're knocking on the door. Open the door, it's Ronnie.
Hey man, what you doing? You mind if I come in here? I want to ask you something.
Sorry, come on in, big dog. What's up? How you stand so hard, to win all these shows? He's like, one of them doing? I'm like, yeah. I said, dude, listen, man. I said, you even carrying your food around. You're so serious, measuring out your food. You're doing it. You gotta just relax, Ronnie. I said, won't you just have a seat, man, do a shot of vodka with me? There ain't no vodka. I don't drink alcohol. I said, look, big dog. I said, listen, take a shot of this vodka, man. You'll be all right. I said, you just chill, man. Take it easy. And he left and went to his room. So I didn't see him until the next morning. We woke up, went to something backstage, pumping up, pulled his clothes off. And I looked at him, dude, and my jaw just dropped. I drank that coffee and that vodka and I went to the show the next day and beat Kevin.
Now, with Dorian Yates having won his 6th Mr. Olympia, it had become standard for the rest of the competition to try to win every other major show they could as a consolation, because it was clear that he just wasn't beatable regardless of what shape he came in. But unbeknownst to the rest of the field, 1998 would see the entire landscape of bodybuilding change forever. Kevin would start 1998 with a dominant win at the San Francisco Pro, followed by back-to-back runner-up placings at the Toronto Pro and Night of Champions. He was approaching a decade as a bodybuilder and had no intentions of slowing down. He had done so much for bodybuilding and sacrificed so much, he was going to go until the wheels fell off. Now, by the time the Olympia had rolled around, everyone had gotten bigger, pushed more gear, and used harsher protocols to get ahead. As the hype for the '98 Olympia had peaked, Kevin was getting ready to get back at the top of the Olympia standings.
Of course, it is the elite competition for professional bodybuilders in the whole world. Not everyone qualifies to have an opportunity to even walk on that stage. And being there, it gives you a burst of energy, the crowd, the media. There's so much going on at a Mr. Olympia competition where if you're down, it just lifts you up. There's nothing to be depressed about when you can walk on a Mr. Olympia stage and be called out and perform.
As all eyes were in Madison Square Garden for the biggest show in bodybuilding, Dorian Yates would go on to drop the biggest bomb of the year. After a 7-year run at the Olympia that resulted in 6 consecutive titles, he would not be competing in 1998 due to multiple injuries setting him back and no longer feeling that fire that used to motivate him.
There was not much joy there. It was like, now I feel like it's starting to feel like I'm doing a job now. And I kind of told myself when it started to feel like that I would think about stopping and what I'm going to do afterwards. So that was in the back of my mind, starting to come forward. And then 6 weeks before the Mr. Olympia, I was hospitalized because I had bleeding on my stomach. So I was hospitalized for 3 days and had a blood transfusion. And this stomach bleeding was caused by some anti-inflammatory medicines that had been given to me by my doctor. So, concerned about the steroids and everything, but it was actually pain medication that was given from my shoulder back then that caused my problems. So that was 6 weeks out. I kind of got over that, but 3 weeks out I tore my tricep tendon pretty much totally off the bone. And it was obvious that I couldn't train the way I wanted to train, and if you're going to compete the best in the world, you've got to be able to train properly. So I was like, rather than go into the contest not being able to train properly, which I would really never do, I'm going to call it a day now.
He came to the Olympia in a suit and as an audience member, causing massive speculation among the competitors as to why Dorian was not pumping iron with them. And it became increasingly clear that Dorian Yates was not going to be competing, a development that none of them expected. They had all been prepping and grinding for a shot at the champ who was on the decline. The man who would beat Dorian Yates would go down in history, but similar to his predecessor, Lee Haney, he wanted to go out on his own terms and while he was still on top. And just like that, it was open season on the Sandow Trophy as 1998 would see the crowning of a brand new Mr. Olympia champion.
So all I'd say is we just come back from backstage and we see these extraordinary bodybuilders, they'll blow your mind. So sit back, relax, and you're going to see the best bodybuilding contest of your lives. Thank you.
The prejudging was as intense and entertaining as any of the last decade because of what was at stake. Most of these guys had spent the better part of 6 years waiting for their shot at the title, and this was it. If there was any time to pose harder than ever, it was at this Olympia. Chief Judge Jim Mannion got ready to dictate the first call-out, a call-out which eventually included a new face that hadn't been there before. Ronnie Coleman. Ronnie had been a staple in the IFBB since the early 90s and had slowly and consistently grinded his way to improvements over the years and a growing schedule of show after show before he finally got some recognition. Remember when I mentioned that everyone was pushing more gear and using harsher protocols? Well, no one is a better example of this than Ronnie Coleman. And it was on full display when he got a shot to stand next to the best in the IFBB, guys who had routinely beaten him multiple times over the last 8 years. Ronnie had spent years making marginal improvements and seeing marginal results while doing everything on his own. However, it took Flex Wheeler's influence to get him to make some changes to what he was using and how he could maximize it.
So me and Ronnie had always been great friends, you know, traveling all over the world and this, that, and the other, competing. And, you know, it's been talked about and he's acknowledged to it. He finally came to me, he was like, man, look, you know, I'm tired of getting my ass whooped. What you doing? You know, because Ronnie was always natural. That's one thing a lot of people didn't know. Ronnie turned pro and competed as a pro naturally for a long time. Ronnie came to me and I'm like, okay, because I learned from people. So I never been effed up like, damn, I ain't going to tell him he might beat me one day. So we sat down and I laid the whole game work down. And next year, he started doing well. I remember he actually beat me in the first competition ever, and we're over in Canada, and he beat me. And I'm like, and Chad would send me pictures of Ronnie getting ready, you know, and I'm like, God dang, we still think, well, you're going to beat him because you're shaped, this, that, and the other. But I'm like, so I remember being on stage, 1998, and, you know, I was in the first call out. I think Ronnie was in the third call out. We never even met each other on stage, but I remember watching him and standing behind him like, God dang. And I, you know, here he is doing a crab pose and his back is striated from top to bottom, his glutes. And I'm thinking to myself, what are they missing with him?
Similar to Kevin Levrone, Ronnie was an insane hyper responder because the amount of size he added in just 1 year was unbelievable. Not to mention his conditioning was almost extraterrestrial. It was a freakish display of size and conditioning, especially from the back. The prejudging saw more shifting of places to get more different looks, which finally culminated in a top 3 of Nasser, Flex, and Ronnie. So, barring a drastic improvement, Kevin once again would find himself outside the top 3 due to the competition being flawless.
Thank you, fellas. Back in line. That concludes the prejudging.
Whatever those guys had done leading up to the Olympia had clearly worked because they were as impressive as ever. The question now was, who would the judges give it to? Who deserved it more? Some felt it was Flex Wheeler as they thought that he was next in line to carry the torch. Some felt that Nasser deserved redemption for the robbery of 97. Or would Ronnie Coleman instead shock the world by coming out of nowhere and leapfrogging everyone else? They say that bodybuilding shows are won from the back, right? Well, when they all turned around, it was pretty clear which bodybuilder reigned supreme. It was just a matter of whether the judges would make the right call. The award ceremony had everyone on the edge of their seats, as each placing would bring everyone closer to what they had been waiting for. Once the placings had dwindled down to the top 5, things were bound to get very interesting.
Sean Ray, 5th place. 4th place, Kevin Levrone. Nasser El Sambate.
Flex Wheeler.
Kevin finished in 4th place behind Nasser, Flex, and the new face of bodybuilding, Ronnie Coleman. A guy who after years of grinding had just lapped the competition and caught up in a way that many couldn't see coming. Poetically enough though, Kevin recalls seeing Ronnie Coleman coming up as a bodybuilder in the early 90s and not seeing much success.
Through all adversities and challenges financially, right? Saving money to catch trains to another country. You know, maybe missing trains, showing up last in shows, you know, paying for his own food, going through all these things. I mean, not a lot of people have the mindset of a champion to withstand those kind of storms and those challenges. They will quit and they will give up. But Ronnie Coleman didn't quit on us. He gave us the blessings that God gave him, and he shared them with us.
And I thank y'all all from the bottom of my heart for being here and cheering us on. Thank you. This is where I got my genetics from, right here, right here. This is why I'm the winner, right here.
The same struggling bodybuilder that Kevin had given advice to back in the day had now taken the torch from Dorian ahead of guys like Kevin and Flex, the ones who a lot of people felt politically were next in line for the throne. But remembering what Joe Reeder told him about the business of being Mr. Olympia made it easier to understand why Ronnie got the nod, because he was extremely special, something that no one could deny. It was a tough break for Kevin, as now he had to try to take down yet another budding star that was hitting his stride. The difference was he had beaten Ronnie before, multiple times, but this wasn't the old Ronnie, a reality that hadn't fully hit everyone yet, but it was about to. In the aftermath of the 1998 Mr. Olympia, Kevin's European tour was a lot shorter than usual, only competing at the German and Finnish Grand Prix, where he placed second at both shows, losing both times to Ronnie. It was looking like it was going to be Dorian all over again, as Ronnie was looking unbeatable after his Olympia victory, and if history was to repeat itself, he had the potential to be the next Dorian Yates, or even better, something which the judges and the leaders clearly believed. As 1998 came to a close, the newest generation of bodybuilding was on the horizon, marking the next phase of the Mass Monster era. Kevin began 1999 deep in prep for the Arnold Classic, a show that he had become very familiar with. Getting a third victory at this show would have been pivotal for Kevin on his run to the 99 Olympia, because now he was going against a different beast, and the window to stop him was going to be extremely short. While Kevin impressed at the Arnold, per usual, it wasn't enough to steal the show. Instead, Nasser took the lead by bringing an undeniable package, which isn't surprising given the level of parity in the IFBB at the time. Every competitor was so talented that predicting who was going to win from show to show became borderline impossible. And not to mention the crop of up-and-coming talent that was looking good, with two young competitors in Dexter Jackson and Jay Cutler placing 7th and 4th respectively. The IFBB was changing, and it was changing fast, and Kevin had no choice but to try to keep up. He'd dedicate the rest of 1999 to getting prepped for a Mr. Olympia that would be decisive not just for the IFBB, but the entire culture of bodybuilding.
From the USA, Dexter Jackson. From the USA, Kevin Levrone.
Everybody's really worked hard this year, and it looks like the standard of competition may have even gone up another level. You know, Ronnie Coleman looked great last year, and I think he's a guy that's got a really good mental approach to the sport, and that's the main thing. That's what separates people from first and second place. And I've got a feeling that he's probably even improved this year.
Good. Good? Looks good.
Going to the show?
Yep.
Yeah. We got a ticket for everything, for body, for cocktail, for real? Yeah. Video going there.
That's just for us. Yeah, man. So, who do you guys want to win? Honestly. Huh? Who's your favorite? To je nasz najlepszy. Chcemy, aby wygrał. Where are you guys from?
Czechoslovakia.
Okay. Who do you like?
I'll do that.
This is my wife.
Hi, how are you?
He was looking at her and in the reception when you were looking at her because he just didn't know it's your wife.
This guy's looking at my wife.
Where are you from?
Italy.
Italy?
Yeah, Sicilian, my father.
Mafia, I like.
Who's your favorite bodybuilder? I want to win, man.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to win this show for 8 years, so I'm going to do my best.
All right. Oh, jeez. Sila. Beautiful. Nice cut.
The 1999 Mr. Olympia kicked off with a massive amount of excitement and hype as the 16-man lineup had a level of talent that was absolutely elite across the board. As the prejudging was underway, it was immediately clear that Ronnie Coleman was going to be a problem, because he was better in every way. What the judges saw in Ronnie's potential had come to fruition with this showing. Ronnie was just different. Now, as expected, he was featured in the first call-out along with Flex Wheeler and Chris Cormier, while Kevin would find himself in the second call-out with Nasser and Paul Dillette, as well as multiple other call-outs thereafter, because the judges kept shuffling to make out what the top 6 would ultimately look like. Kevin found himself in 7th after the first round, but had improved enough while posing to move up 1 placing to 6th by the end of the prejudging. Once a perennial no-brainer for a top 3 placing, Kevin was no longer the dominant presence he once was, as hungry faces hitting their peaks were getting their time in the limelight, faces that he once inspired. But what made that even crazier was the fact that he looked like this and was still not contending for the title. Despite coming back a lot fuller in the finals, the top 3 had already been decided, and Kevin was not among them. Instead, Chris Cormier, Flex Wheeler, and reigning champion Ronnie Coleman had a worthy finals battle to cap off the century. After the finals posed down and the awards had gotten down to the top 5, you couldn't help but notice that Kevin was not too far off. Conditioning is where he fell behind the rest, but in terms of every other aspect of what made a bodybuilder Olympia caliber, Kevin had it all.
And the award and presented to Kevin Levrone.
10 years in the bodybuilding game at this point, and he was nowhere near being done. But for yet another year, he'd have to watch the Sandow go to Ronnie Coleman. Post 99 Olympia, Kevin dialed back into his European tour, opting to only compete at the World Pro Championships and the English Grand Prix, placing 3rd at both shows. Having been competing in Europe post Mr. Olympia since 1993, Kevin has seen it all multiple times, not to mention being 35 and needing to give his body some rest. Kevin was now at a point where he needed to be more selective of what shows he was putting his energy into, because he couldn't afford to be adding more wear and tear than necessary with his Olympia window closing, because Ronnie Coleman was only going to get bigger and better, and everyone knew it.
Hi, I'm Kevin Levrone. In this training video, I'm going to show you how I got the name, the Maryland Muscle Machine. 100-pound dumbbell curls in your face. Maryland Muscle Machine mass in your face. 100 dumbbell curls. 1 arm. Don't try that on.
The start of the century represented a new age in bodybuilding, one that continued the marathon of the 90s. But for Kevin, it actually represented the start of something new. Kevin had always been a creative person with a creative mind, something he tapped into in his formative years. But it would be in 2000 that he'd decide to take it to the next level, as he'd form a band with some of his friends called Full Blown. The name was inspired by his iconic workout video from 5 years prior. He had taught himself to play various instruments over the years and spent time honing in on his craft when he was not prepping. This creative mindset was also the reason why he never choreographed his posing routines or planned them in advance. He didn't even pick his music until the night show, because he wanted to go with whatever he was feeling in the moment and allow himself to be immersed in the music fully and let his routine come to him in real time. To Kevin, music made him feel something, which is probably a big factor in his stage presence and presentation, especially in the way that he always flowed. He would get to the venue a little early just to feel the vibe of the auditorium. Then by the time the finals came around, he'd decide what song he wanted last minute, something that was actually against the rules, causing him to get fined every time he'd do this, but Kevin clearly didn't care. Now, phase 2 of the Mass Monster era was going to be highlighted by more growth, taking the art form to an extreme that would change its public perception forever. For Kevin, it was all eyes on the Mr. Olympia, and as had been tradition for several years, he went back to the Arnold Classic once again. Kevin was vastly improved from the '99 Olympia as he had brought the sharp conditioning that the judges wanted to see. Unfortunately for him though, Chris Cormier and Flex Wheeler were still hot, and came in good enough to be in the favor of the judges. His finals routine was as impressive as ever, and exactly what everyone came to expect from Kevin. But in the end, Flex and Chris would still edge him out for 1 and 2, leaving Kevin in 3rd place. He had now found himself in the same position he was just a few years prior when he was consistently losing to Nasser and Paul Dillette. But this time, it was Chris and Flex, which made it seem as if it was no longer Kevin's time, especially if the judges didn't even see him as the #1 contender. So naturally, when it came to the Mr. Olympia, nobody knew what to predict when it came to Kevin. He had been so consistent over the last decade that it was downright foolish to write him off. But at this point, it had felt like a while since we saw Kevin really push for the title. He had placed 4th 3 consecutive times from 97 to 99, hadn't cracked the top 3 since 96, and his last runner-up was in 1995. Conventional wisdom would indicate that Kevin wasn't trending in the right direction, but this was a man who overcame the worst adversity possible. He overcame one of the most brutal injuries and still continued to compete at a high level for years afterwards. So no matter how happy any of these other guys were to be beating Kevin, they couldn't get too comfortable knowing that he could never be counted out. Kevin's consistency over the years, as well as his extreme mindset when prepping, is exactly why he was so respected, because he had proven multiple times over that he was capable of stealing the show. It was just a matter of timing. This was a man who went to the deepest and darkest levels of self-deprivation to lock into his mindset. To Kevin Levrone, if he wasn't suffering, he wasn't doing it right. He would deprive himself of simple pleasures like ketchup and syrup, even though he could easily metabolize those things. It wasn't just about a physique for him. It was about his mindset. He'd even go as far as to deprive himself of a proper bed, as during prep, he'd sleep on the floor in the middle of his guns to condition his mind for warfare and battle. He understood that dialing it in and reaching his peak conditioning required pain and suffering. Kevin was a different animal when it came to how serious he took his preps heading into the Mr. Olympia, and in 2000, he would remind everyone of why they called him the Maryland Muscle Machine. As the initial comparisons were over and the top call-out was announced, Kevin finally found himself back in the top 3 at the Mr. Olympia by bringing the best version of Kevin Levrone that we had seen to date. This was not only the biggest Kevin Levrone the bodybuilding world had seen, but he was absolutely peeled in every aspect. His color was perfect, he was dry to the bone, and had the signature fullness to combat Ronnie. This was the version of Kevin that everyone else was afraid of, and in the prejudging, it was very clear why. With Ronnie at center stage indicating he was the frontrunner, Kevin and Flex's placings were going to be ambiguous as it wasn't clear based on their positions who was in second. But to many in attendance who were paying attention, it looked like it was clearly Kevin. The final comparisons were absolutely intense, as Flex was in the 2nd place spot after the first round of mandatories. That was until he was promptly replaced with Kevin.
Gentlemen, relax, turn to the rear, and the judges want Kevin and Flex to flip-flop places.
Kevin had come in so much more improved from the prejudging that he was genuinely pushing Ronnie Coleman to the absolute brink. And in a hilarious display of showmanship, Kevin even patted Ronnie's stomach to poke fun at him struggling to keep it tight. while Kevin had brought a much tighter midsection with just the same amount of mass. He knew that he absolutely brought it, and was as supremely confident as he had ever been. If there was any year for Kevin to take the throne, it would be 2000.
To every expediter that told me where to stand, down to every light man with a plan, to every judge that has judged me, to every photographer and writer that pour their hearts and souls out so the world can see, and to all my fans and loved ones that cry for me, this one's for you, baby.
After an intense pose down to get the crowd going, it was time to reveal who the top 6 would be. Just like that, Kevin was so close to the Sandow Trophy that he could taste it. Victory had never been more tangible, but the only very big thing standing in his way was the man who would eventually become known as the King. The unstoppable force was meeting this immovable object, and regardless of what happened, history would be made.
And Jeff Long of ProLab. And they will present the certificate, the silver Sandow medal, the silver Olympia medal, and a check for $55,000 to Kevin Levrone.
A mix of boos and cheers would be heard all throughout the Mandalay Bay Arena as Kevin Levrone was announced as a second-place finisher, while Ronnie Coleman would fall to his knees for the 3rd consecutive year as he would be crowned a 3-time Mr. Olympia champion. Gracious in victory and defeat, Kevin made sure to congratulate Ronnie and accept his second-place medal, but a few micro-expressions couldn't help but reveal his disappointment in the announcement. This was Dorian all over again, as Ronnie Coleman had become the new boogeyman of the IFBB. The judges over the years had shown that they wanted more and more size, and Kevin brought it. They wanted sharper and grainier conditioning, and he brought that too. They wanted maximum fullness and dense muscularity, and he brought exactly that. And yet he still couldn't win the title. As grateful as he was for all the opportunities that bodybuilding afforded him, constantly getting overlooked was a tough pill to swallow. And perpetually having this dominant force looming over him was becoming discouraging. He genuinely believed in his heart that he had beaten Ronnie Coleman on that night, and maintains to this day that this was his best physique to bring to the Olympia stage, and it's not hard to see why.
Yeah. What is it about this Mr. Olympia that I just cannot win? And I had beaten everyone before on the Mr. Olympia stage, except Dorian Yates. So when he retired, I thought, wow, I might have a shot, which was in 2000.
Yeah.
I gave it all I had in 2000, and I came back, and I felt as though I had Ronnie, because at that show, he had he had just put on a little more size and lost some lines around the midsection, even though he was massive, but I felt like I had the complete package. After that, it was like the wind kind of like got out of my sails.
But all he could do was continue to try to replicate what he had just done, because giving up was not an option. A European tour in 2000 was now off the table for Kevin, as he was going to devote all his time and energy to prepping for the following year's Olympia. He had grown a bit tired of having to diet and sleep while constantly on the road. His body was never able to adjust to a consistent sleep schedule, nor was he able to recover the way he wanted to. It was a different approach that he hadn't done before, but one that was becoming more common among other pros given what they were now up against. Ronnie Coleman was looking more dominant than Dorian, which meant everyone else would need to be more meticulous with their preps to ensure they peaked perfectly for the 2001 Mr. Olympia. And that was all that Kevin had on his mind. If Ronnie was the only thing in his way, all he'd have to do is replicate what he brought in 2000 to give him another run. He'd follow his normal protocol of switching over strictly to fish, rice, and broccoli 6 weeks out, and upping his cardio to about 1 to 2 hours a day, on top of double sessions in the gym. He was the man on a mission, and was ready to prove that nobody deserved it more than he did, and his window was starting to close with young names like Dexter Jackson and Jay Cutler coming. Kevin knew he had to make the most of every prep. But the toll was starting to weigh him down, as it had done for the rest of the competition. Everyone was starting to get tired of the same predictable result at the Olympia, due to a lack of variety in the judging. This made a lot of competitors feel like they weren't getting an adequate opportunity to get a fair look. This frustration came to a head at the 2001 Mr. Olympia press conference, which would go down as one of the most contentious and dramatic press conferences in Olympia history, which was highlighted by the theme of the IFBB versus bodybuilding supervillain Ronnie Coleman, led by Kevin Levrone himself. What also didn't help matters for the judges was one of them getting exposed.
As well, the judges will have their say, the judges can have their say, but the problem that we have is that when somebody stands up in the audience to address the judges and address the judging issues, it's an open and shut place. Nobody follows it up. Wayne sat there and said that the athletes have access to a piece of paper with the individual scores. I saw that paper like 2 years of my 13, 14-year career. If that's true, come Saturday night, the paper I get hopefully will not have the judges' totals. It will have every individual judge that judged the scores in each round that they judged it, so that we get the final product, the one that they had when they judged, not the one that has no scores next to their names. I don't understand what the problem is with that, but I certainly shouldn't have to go and make a special trip to Wayne DeMillia's room to get that piece of paper. It should be with all the rest of the stuff that everybody else has. What are we hiding? So let's turn the lights on and get it out there so that every athlete got their same opportunity.
Okay, Sean.
I'm going to tell you, hold on 1 second. I'm almost finished. This is the problem I have, is that the individual judges take my comments personal.
No, this is not personal. This is not personal. I'm giving you the facts, Sean.
I know, but
I just want to give you the facts. And everybody else the facts, too.
Can I finish? I mean, I got the mic. I'm in the show. It affects my career.
Yeah, but you're going to take like an hour.
That's why we haven't moved forward, because you want to open and shut discussion. I mean, you emailed me, Deshay. You've called me and we talked on the phone.
Yeah, that's why it's nothing personal.
I know.
That's why it's nothing personal. That's why
Can I finish my statement and let the other athletes get on with this? You guys want to hear Deshay talk?
During an interaction between Sean Ray and one of the judges over the fairness of the judging process, she made a comment that would get her removed from the judges panel entirely.
I need to do that, Deshay.
Okay, so why don't you do that? Because that's what we're here for.
Listen,
we're here to better yourself, because you come in the same every year. You don't
That's your
change.
opinion, and this is your first Mr. Olympia that you're judging. Whether I change.
Yeah, but I've judged the Arnold twice. I've judged the Ironman. I've got 20 years of experience.
For a judge to openly admit to bias against an athlete in front of the entire bodybuilding world was absolutely a terrible look for the IFBB, and served to validate a lot of what Sean and Kevin were saying.
Can I say something real quick?
I don't understand your.
Can I say something real quick? It has to be a problem somewhere.
You're saying I don't have experience, and I do.
It has to be a problem
Wayne DeMillia
somewhere.
would not have me judging.
It has to be a problem somewhere when all the fans are booing. We put on the show, we die, we do what we have to do, okay? There's a problem every time something's announced. Everybody's booing. The people aren't stupid.
Yeah, but
are
Kevin,
you?
I'm not saying. I would be glad to have everybody look at what I scored. I don't have a problem with that.
The only thing
but
is,
Sean Ray doesn't understand that he thinks there's other judges year after year
No, there's not.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the Mr. Olympia, you know. There's never been a Mr. Olympia that has been beat. Why?
Because Ronnie Coleman.
One time, Kevin Smith. You know what I mean? That's all. I mean, it's just that we have certain answers that we need answered.
On that
we have
day.
questions that we need answered. That's it, you know? And we're not trying to come down on any judge or anything, but
nobody comes and questions us. Nobody comes up and says, hey, why did you place me second? I can say, look.
Because at this point, if the athletes speak up, we're afraid we're going to be punished. Certain people are afraid we're going to be punished.
That doesn't happen.
I'd like to say something about the judging myself.
That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen on a state level or a national level.
Hello.
If anybody would bother to come and see.
All I'm saying is there's a problem somewhere when there's booing going on with the overall decision. It happened last year. It happens all the time.
They were tired of having a standout gatekeeper and putting in all this effort towards a competition that was feeling like a foregone conclusion, on top of not being able to get proper transparency from the judges. But in a move that validated his supervillain identity, Ronnie reminded everyone that before he became the guy, he was constantly overlooked by the judges as well. So if they didn't like it, work harder. But to quote Ronnie himself, why complain?
I had something to say. Right. We don't live in a perfect society. Nothing's never going to be perfect. From day one, we've been battling over this and battling over that. Nobody's ever liked everything somebody else has ever liked. I don't like ice cream. Bob don't like ice cream. Susie does. I don't like apples, and John don't like oranges. I don't like oranges either. It's always going to be a problem. In 1992, I didn't place at all in the Olympia. Didn't get a dime, didn't get a dollar. I didn't complain. 1994, I didn't complain when I got 15th. 1995, I didn't complain when I got 11th. 1996, I didn't complain when I got 6th. 1997, I didn't complain when I got 9th. The moral to the story is, why complain?
And I won't get booed Saturday like you will.
All I got to say is, I'm 3-time Mr. Olympia. How many times have you won?
I'll tell you this, how about how many times have I whipped you in competitions? More than you beat me, brother.
You count them up.
You know what?
You count them up and you tell me
more
about it.
More than you beat me, baby.
Kevin. You count them up and you tell me about it.
Hey, Kevin. Maybe about 9, 8, 9 times.
When was the last time you beat me?
Hey, Kevin.
What have you done for me lately?
Hey, Kevin.
What have you done to me lately? I'm not living in the past.
The judges saw a much bigger version of Ronnie than ever, which was the least bit shocking. What was shocking, however, was a young Jay Cutler who just 4 years into his pro career had found himself in the top call-out, just like Kevin did when he stepped on the scene. Jay had improved drastically, bringing dense muscle and conditioning that was enough to hang with the big boys. Kevin was also in top shape, bringing a physique that was arguably better than 2000. This was a highly entertaining prejudging as the top three battled it out. But what remained crystal clear, especially when these guys turned around, was that Ronnie was just on a different level. The battle for second place was firmly between Jay and Kevin, as they were both extremely impressive. To the untrained eye, it would be hard to decide a clear runner-up, but anyone who pays attention to bodybuilding would see that Jay's conditioning was a bit sharper. But he was the new kid on the block in the top three, so most would have thought that Kevin would have gotten the nod having been the veteran. But all would be revealed in the finals. With the finals underway, the top guys battled it out once again and put on a great show for the fans. As much as Kevin Levrone fans wanted him to easily get into the top two, it was impossible to deny how impressive Jay Cutler was, particularly in terms of conditioning, so the final outcome would have fans on the edge of their seats.
Chris isn't going to give, Ronnie's not going to give. These are 265-pound monsters trying to push each other around. The guys that have the advantage here are the veterans. Kevin Levrone is always taking his time at whatever poses he's going to do. Jay Cutler finds himself in a very unfamiliar position, standing next to Ronnie Coleman, trying to go pose for pose. And then again, the stage really isn't big enough for these 6 athletes. Oh, Ronnie Coleman jumps off the stage and goes into the crowd, and he's followed by Chris Cormier. but it looks like all the athletes are now going down into the audience. This has never happened at a Mr. Olympia contest in its 36-year history. And this is definitely a plus for the sport of bodybuilding for the fans to get this close to the action. Jay Cutler's actually signaling out fans to direct their cameras towards him. And there's Chris Cormier showing his appreciation. Cameras all over the place. And Orville Burke comes in 6th place after getting 10th place last year. The real deal out of Venice Beach, California, pulls in the 5th place spot and $30,000 being presented to him by Kerry Kays of
Sean Ray.
In 4th place, a repeat of last year's Mr. Olympia, me, Sean Ray, $35,000 for the effort, being awarded by Jeff Everson, former editor of Muscle and Fitness.
Comics.
Ronnie Coleman's been there before, and Jay
Bryant
Cutler,
of Universal Supplements,
out of nowhere, comes into the top 3 after placing 8th place
Davis
1 year
Alley
ago
of
and not even in the top 10 2 years ago.
Scott Welch of Muscle Tech, Kevin Levrone.
And Kevin Levrone in 3rd place, $40,000 richer. In the moment of truth, Ronnie Coleman, 4-time Mr. Olympia. Jay Cutler, first-time runner-up and $60,000 richer. As Ronnie Coleman, known for his trademark dropping to his knees for the 4th consecutive year. Jay Cutler receives the silver medallion, the $60,000 prize money. Jay Cutler, admirable, gallant fight all the way to the finish. For the 4th year in a row, the policeman out of Arlington, Texas, Ronnie Coleman.
Ronnie Coleman was now a 4-time Mr. Olympia champion, with Jay Cutler being the runner-up. Kevin would place 3rd at the Olympia for the 3rd time in his career. Jay's surge and win over Kevin at that point in his career represented yet another obstacle in Kevin's way. And with Jay not even close to his full potential and already a top contender, it looked like the writing was on the wall for Kevin Levrone's Mr. Olympia aspirations. After the Olympia, he'd return to Europe on a short tour, competing at the 2001 English Grand Prix, where he'd dominate an absolutely stacked class of competitors, 27 to be exact. It was a quick reminder to everyone who might have been confused that Kevin Levrone was not going anywhere. The bodybuilding landscape had drastically changed since Kevin had stepped on the scene in the early 90s, with so many fresh faces now rising up the ranks. Sean Ray and Ronnie Coleman were the only 2 notable bodybuilders in the IFBB who had come up the ranks with Kevin and were still competing at a high level. With Father Time being undefeated, many assumed that Kevin's fall-off was inevitable, as is the case in the cycle of bodybuilding. But after his dominant showing in England, they'd have to wait a little bit longer. Now, Kevin returned to the Arnold in 2002, but was far from his best shape. Having been way off in his conditioning and holding on to way too much water, he'd end up in 5th place. Meanwhile, Jay Cutler would go on to win his first Arnold Classic title, which marked the clear rise of Jay Cutler as the Olympia contender for 2002. Now, Kevin would try to gain some more momentum at the Australian Grand Prix, but came up short again, placing 4th. His placings had become a lot more volatile, in the sense where he was no longer a guaranteed top placer at any show. He was either going to underwhelm or blow everyone away. Where he placed, though, was completely up to the judges. But by mid-2002, it was really looking like Kevin was nearing the end of his run as a threat for the title, especially with Jay, Chris Cormier, and even a young Dexter Jackson having gotten wins over him recently. Now, Kevin being 38 made it a lot more difficult for him to peak his physique and recover from training the way he used to. Training had become a lot more strategic, but the warrior mentality remained, which is exactly what kept him going all these years and carried him into what was set to be a big Mr. Olympia in 2002. Jay Cutler had become Kevin's biggest obstacle in just the blink of an eye, but with Jay having ultimately decided to watch the O2 Olympia from the sidelines, Kevin's path to a battle with Ronnie had just become a lot easier. It was just a matter of whether he was going to bring it or not.
Welcome to GMV Videos. I'm Sean Ray, your host for the 2002 Mr. Olympia here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm backstage at the pump-up area where you're going to meet the biggest and the best bodybuilders on the planet Earth. This year, you're not going to see this from me. a little small, but you're going to get a lot of this. I'm going to be reporting backstage here as we got the return of Flex Wheeler coming off a 2-year hiatus in the Mr. Olympia contest. We've got Ronnie Coleman going for his 5th consecutive win here at the Mandalay Bay, trying to become a 5-time champion of the Mr. Olympia. We also have Kevin Levrone. Kevin Levrone slipped a few places last year and also had a very hard time in the offseason, had a hernia operation. He's taken full ownership of his gym. He's gone through some personal problems, but he says he's ready to make the comeback here tonight. All your fans, the Kevin Levrone fans, the Maryland Muscle Machine, the winningest pro bodybuilder in the history of this sport. 3-time first runner-up at the Olympia, coming off a 3rd place from last year. 245 pounds, getting ready to try to go up there and do it again.
In the prejudging, we saw size on full display. It was crazy to think that at one point, Kevin was 218 pounds on stage, but in 2002, he went pound for pound with Ronnie, literally coming in at 245 pounds, matching Ronnie's size. But similar to what we saw with Dorian in 1996, Ronnie's lines were starting to get blown out, and his midsection was becoming a lot more distended to a noticeable degree. Meanwhile, Kevin was still razor sharp, making the comparison damn close, even closer than in 2000. Kevin had clearly brought it at this Olympia, just when people were starting to count him out again. He had this uncanny ability to completely surprise everyone with a dialed-in package. In 2002 was him raising the bar in a big way. Kevin ended the prejudging in 2nd place, slightly behind Ronnie, who was the frontrunner. The finals, however, are where things got very interesting. Ronnie couldn't dwarf Kevin on size because they were equal. He couldn't beat him on conditioning either because Kevin had gotten way better by the night show. This did not look like a clear and easy victory for Ronnie anymore, as Kevin was making it difficult for the judges. But after a hard-fought confirmation round and an intense pose down, Kevin would find himself so close to a Sandow for the 4th time in his career. So would 2002 finally be the year of Kevin Levrone?
First place will receive the gold Sandow medal, the gold Olympia medal, $110,000 check, the Sandow statue. And this year, for the first time, which will become an annual event. And our appreciation goes to the Bodyonics Pinnacle Company, Mel Rich and Steve Stern. They will also be presenting to the winner the Pinnacle Performance Muscle Car, this year a brand new 2003 Cadillac Escalade EXT. Second place award is being presented by Dave Walker of Physical Magazine. Susie Curry of Metrics, Kane Wendt of Muscle Market USA, John Natashak of Universal Nutrition, Jack Owak of VPX Sports, and Cynthia Rothrock and Larry Higgins of RealEntertainmentNetwork.com. And those awards will be presented to the 2nd place winner, Kevin Levrone.
4 times in the top 2, 4 runner-ups. That had never happened before in the history of the Mr. Olympia. Kevin had done it all. He put on the mass, he improved the conditioning, and went to the depths of his soul to one day be worthy of the title, and yet he came up short once again. What made matters worse was the fact that he had beaten Ronnie on the scorecards in the finals. So had he been able to win in the prejudging, he would have been the new Mr. Olympia. But for Kevin, that was all he had. There just wasn't a lot more he could do that he wasn't already doing. Ronnie was just too dominant, and Jay, Dexter, and Chris Cormier were rapidly improving as 2003 was approaching.
Kevin, tell me why are you doing this? What made you want to race weight change?
I'm good at running, and today just gonna show the world. You know what I mean?
You can smoke
what I got, baby. As far as smoking.
With no other shows on the docket for Kevin after the 2002 Olympia, he found himself back at the Arnold Classic in 2003, having regressed significantly, especially in terms of his conditioning, putting him well outside the top 3. He didn't fare any better in the finals, as Jay Cutler would go on to absolutely steal the show and win his second consecutive Arnold Classic title. The Olympia push of 2003 left a lot of fans with questions around Kevin's future in bodybuilding. Was he really going to get bigger again? Was it worth it? When was it going to be time to hang up the posing trunks?
I always take some time off, as usual, to let my body, just relax and let my joints and everything, go back to normal, and so you can feel normal and not be so wound up about nutrition and being on a competitive edge the whole time. So after Mr. Olympia, I go and give it 100% coming into these contests.
Kevin's 2003 Olympia showing would not be a repeat of the year prior, as he wasn't able to bring that sharpness he was known for, resulting in a 6th place finish, a massive drop-off from being a runner-up in 2002.
Number 13, Kevin Levrone. I don't care. I know.
He was a living legend, who had done so much for the art of bodybuilding and brought some of the most amazing packages that the IFBB had ever seen. But after the 2003 Mr. Olympia, it was legitimately starting to look like the writing was on the wall. And yet, the competitor in him only knew bodybuilding, and he wasn't ready to walk away. He was going to go until he physically couldn't anymore. Following the Olympia, he'd compete at the Show of Strengths Pro Championship, finishing in 3rd place to end 2003.
I keep getting asked this question: are you going to compete again, or are you going to come back to the stage?
It was yet another off-season with another impending grind on Kevin's plate. His body was feeling the fatigue of 14 years in the game, with 11 Olympia appearances. He was among many that were in the shadow of a generational great, and was physically running out of gas. At this point, he was growing tired of constantly placing second and being overlooked after displaying the level of consistency he had over the years. Killing yourself to be the best that you can to end up in second once can be a lot for most people. But it happened to Kevin 4 times. And after the 4th time, he was starting to question whether he could continue to do it. He continued pushing forward because that was all he knew. He, like many veterans of any discipline, struggled to walk away given how much he loved doing what he did. However, with his body not being capable of matching his mental intensity, Kevin found himself suffering another major setback during his prep for the 2004 Mr. Olympia, completely blowing the winds out of his sails and killing his progress. He had already been questioning his ability to continue, and his entire future in bodybuilding. He was 40 years old and trying his best to still hang on to his prime, but as the gear usage in bodybuilding was reaching unforeseen levels, Kevin didn't even know how much he wanted to keep pushing his body. Having already been tired, with one foot out the door, this injury was effectively the catalyst for missing out on the 2004 Olympia, the first Olympia he'd missed since his rookie year in the IFBB. For the first time in over a decade, Kevin had to watch the Olympia from afar. But he was okay with that, because he was looking to pivot to other creative outlets and challenge himself. Bodybuilding had taught him resilience and discipline, but also took so much out of him. So as different as it was for him to not be prepping and getting ready for an Olympia, he was ready to learn how not to be a bodybuilder. To many, this was relatively difficult, as being successful at anything requires intertwining your entire identity with your passion. But Kevin had always been passionate about a lot of different creative outlets, as evidenced by the start of his music career. This was something he dived back into after stepping away from bodybuilding, as Full Blown would get to working on some music in their first official album. But while that was in the works, Kevin would follow in the footsteps of one of his biggest inspirations in Arnold Schwarzenegger by pursuing an acting career. You see, music wasn't the only creative outlet that Kevin felt drawn to, and his reputation as a bodybuilder had opened up some doors for him in the acting world. He made his acting debut in the 2006 action-filled cat and mouse thriller Backlash, where Kevin had a pretty big role as a guy named Turk.
Be on standby.
Don't ever keep me waiting like this. You ready? It's a go.
The movie was rated R and filmed partly in Trinidad and Tobago. The budget wasn't high, and it definitely reflected in the film, as it was met with some harsh reviews, only scoring a 3.1 on IMDb. Along with that came a pretty scathing review describing the acting as quote-unquote truly awful. However, for Kevin to take the leap and venture into acting exemplified his self-motivated nature, because he never wanted to win an Academy Award, but mainly to challenge himself. While his acting career didn't start off too hot, he'd have better success in music. That same year, Full Blown would release their first single under the record label they signed to, AM/FM Entertainment. This signing actually led the Weeders to getting involved in supporting Kevin by striking a deal with the band to sell 100,000 copies of their first single, Davistania, which translates to Gone Forever in Russian. The song was distributed in the September edition of Flex magazine in the UK, Germany, and Italy. The magazine sold 90,000 copies that month, almost doubling the sales amount of a normal publication. This led to their second single, Burning Bridges, doing even better and selling 250,000 copies. They'd eventually release a full album called Mirage, which would be met with moderate success. Shortly after this, Kevin got another big break in acting, scoring a role in what ended up being his biggest movie, Redline, where he played the role of Sante.
All right? What do you want me to do with her? Get rid of her? No, man, don't get rid of her. Just make sure nothing happens to her. I got you.
Contrary to his last project on screen, Redline had a much bigger budget, $26 million to be exact. Unfortunately, the film would flop at the box office, in what would be called a critical failure by many media outlets. The movie was released April of 2007 and went on to gross $8.3 million, taking a massive loss. It was basically a poor man's Fast and Furious. You know, when your mom says we have Fast and Furious at home, because the movie definitely was not up to par. But I did like the idea of seeing Kevin as the Vin Diesel of this parallel universe. With a 4 out of 10 on IMDb, it didn't do that much better than Kevin's last film. However, to bodybuilding fans, it didn't matter. It was just really cool to be able to see Kevin Levrone performing again, even if it wasn't on stage. In 2008, he'd make yet another appearance in the film I Am in the role of Chaos Salam, another seemingly low-budget film that wasn't able to gain much traction. Now, Kevin was still involved in the bodybuilding community during this time, by continuing to do interviews and appearances at shows. Although he hadn't severed ties with the IFBB, he was clearly very far removed from competing at this point. Now, in an effort to continue to connect with his fans at the dawn of the social media age, Kevin decided to get into an avenue that he was not very familiar with, YouTube. He started his YouTube channel in 2006, but wouldn't post his first video until 2009 when he launched his blog, KevinLevroneReport.com, a site in which he seems to no longer be active on. But at the time, it was home to all the details around his new online presence and his training goals as an inactive bodybuilder. He would often post his YouTube videos to accompany whatever his latest update was for the viewers on his blog. Now, his first video was recorded in February of 2009 and was a simple interview where he answered some of the biggest questions that the fans had wanted to know. And judging by the comments, people absolutely loved it.
But another thing I want to touch on is, because that was one of the rumors, other rumors are that you heavily favored the behind-the-neck press. Everybody's seen you in the videos doing the behind-the-neck press. Did you feel like after you tore your pec that changed that at all, or did you still keep those in there after you tore your pec?
Well, to answer, first of all, every piece of weight that I use was always the real weight. So that is 400 pounds behind the neck press. And I've always trained heavy because, Jerry, I have a powerlifting background. I actually went to a powerlifting show and I won when I was 168 pounds, you know, at the Mr. Colossus show in Baltimore. I was 186. I bench pressed 405 pounds. Wow. You know, and that was naturally clean. That's what I did at that body weight. You know, I was always naturally strong when it came to bench pressing.
He'd follow this video up with a proper introduction to his channel to let the fans know what was to come.
Hey, I'm Kevin Levrone. I'm just coming to you guys to share some news with you to let you know that I've decided to do a blog. How amazing. But I'm into all this new technology now. I actually have a Blackberry, which is pretty awesome. Get on my Twitter. Catch me on Twitter too, right? All that information, I'm sharing it with you guys through my blog. Check my blog out because there's a lot of things that I have to say because I've traveled the world 8 or 9 different times and know what's happening more than most people. Okay, so enjoy.
From there, Kevin would continue to make simple commentary videos where he'd speak directly to his audience about various different topics, varying from goals, overcoming obstacles, and even his thoughts on post-workout protein shakes. He'd also get some sit-down interviews with the biggest names in bodybuilding that he's competed against, like Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman, as well as an interview with the biggest new up-and-comer in the game, Phil Heath. Now, it wouldn't be until May of 2009 when Kevin would make the first video in a series of videos that would eventually become integral to his channel.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Levrone here, and I want to thank you for all your support on LevroneReport.com. Great questions. Man, it's been a great ride so far, right? I keep getting asked this question: are you going to compete again? Or are you going to come back to the stage? I don't think so. And you know, great memories, but I was in the gym today. I'm going to confess, I was in the gym. And I'm back into it. And I'm going to document my secret body transformation, how I gained 5 pounds of muscle a week over a month and 2 month period. How I'm going to take my body from 206 pounds to 245 pounds. All right? I'm going to document it. You guys can see it here on LevroneReport.com. So keep checking back.
This series was massive to bodybuilding fans because at this point, Kevin's hyper-responsiveness to gear had just been kind of a rumor, speculation, one of those things that you had to see to believe. But with the advent of social media and his new grind on YouTube, Kevin was able to actually show the fans how he did it one video at a time. He documented his training, diet, and subsequent progress over the course of the next few months, both in his blog and on his YouTube channel. Now, it is important to note that Kevin was doing all of this naturally, something which he validated on his blog when he posted the results of a steroid test for full transparency. He wasn't joking when he said he wanted to show the fans exactly what he was doing and how he was accomplishing his results, which made his transformation all the more shocking. Over the course of his early YouTube journey, you could clearly see Kevin start to pack on some serious muscle, which validated to everyone who might have doubted how fast he could grow that he really was a genetic freak, and the fact that he was doing it while approaching 50 was all the more impressive. Now, this very same year, Kevin went on to accomplish the ultimate feat, what he had worked all those years for. He became one of the 4 bodybuilders in the history of the IFBB to be inducted into their Hall of Fame, and he couldn't have been more deserving. By 2010, he had been out of the bodybuilding game for 7 years, and the fans had moved on. To the entire bodybuilding world, the talk around Kevin at this point centered around who he was in his prime and what he meant to the sport. Meanwhile, Kevin was focused on his music and other business ventures. As the 2010s started to go by, he kept pretty quiet on a lot of fronts while making up for lost time with his family. You see, Kevin's relentless dedication to bodybuilding meant being all in, which meant he'd often spend a lot of time away from family and friends during prep, as he had missed 7 family reunions at the height of his career. While he tried his best to maintain some balance during his prime, bodybuilding was always at the forefront. But like most successful pros while active and in retirement, Kevin always made sure to maximize his earnings from his career. So even though he wasn't an active bodybuilder, his legacy was still alive and well. So in the mid-2010s, he went all in on the Kevin Levrone Signature Series, his supplement line where he sells everything from whey protein and creatine to test tablets and liver support capsules. In 2012, he had re-established his musical presence by releasing a single called Avalanche, and in 2015, he released 3 more singles, with some even accompanied by music videos. Now, by 2015, most people would have considered Kevin Levrone to be a retired bodybuilder, a fair assessment given the fact that he hadn't competed in 13 years. But here's the thing, Kevin hadn't officially retired from bodybuilding.
When I had stopped competing, I never announced, there's not one video anywhere of me announcing my retirement from the sport, which a lot of athletes always do that.
There was never an announcement from him, the IFBB, or anybody. He just faded into the shadows in the eyes of many bodybuilding fans to never return again. Or so we thought.
I decided to come out of retirement, do what I can do best, and take it to the stage at the Mr. Olympia, baby.
Now, this fact was pretty important when you take into account Kevin's content at the time, because by mid-2015, it was very clear that he was putting on significantly more muscle than he was at the beginning of his transformation. It was a lot bigger, a lot grainier, a lot more dense, and he was significantly more vascular. You could even say that Kevin was looking full-blown. Bodybuilding at this point had seen some drastic changes. The legacy that Dorian and Ronnie had left continued to leave its mark as the landscape of open bodybuilding had lent itself to heavier and heavier gear use, affecting the quality of the competition overall, a sentiment that Kevin agreed with. During Kevin's absence, he got to witness two of the young guys coming up behind him eventually become Mr. Olympia champions, with Jay Cutler having gone on to dethrone Ronnie in 06 and winning 3 more Olympias in 07, 09, and 2010, while Dexter Jackson had won his lone Olympia title in 08 after dethroning Jay. The mainstream appeal of bodybuilding at this point had faded away, and the IFBB had begun to include newer divisions like Classic, Men's Physique, and Bikini to attract a broader group of competitors. The face of open bodybuilding was now a former basketball player named Phil Heath, who would go on to be known as The Gift. He was in the thick of his prime, highlighted by an intense feud with Kai Green, and was chasing his 6th Mr. Olympia title. Guys like Dexter Jackson, Sean Roden, and Big Ramy were at his heel and gunning for him, something that had become commonplace over the last few years as Phil was becoming an unstoppable force himself. However, unbeknownst to the entire bodybuilding world, Kevin Levrone was about to shake things up as he announced in 2016 that he would be returning to bodybuilding and ending his hiatus.
Propelling moving forward. I've been off the stage for 11 years, going on 12 years. And I've always thought that I kind of left something up there on stage because I was 4-time runner-up, twice to Rodney Coleman, twice to Dorian Yates. Seeing the fierce physique that they brought on stage was just unbelievable. I mean, Steven Weinberg, he coached Dorian Yates. It was just unbelievable. Yates was just like a piece of stone trying to move. But I mean, I felt like I had it. I felt like I got to move off stage a couple times, you know what I mean? And but you learn a lot going through that. And also, Rodney Coleman, one of the fiercest competitors, one of the best physiques you've ever seen walk across stage. Again, I want to go to battle against this guy. And as I'm sitting back for these 11 years, and I'm thinking, it might be a little more salt left in the basement. And this decision wasn't just made overnight. This is something that I've been pondering with for the last 8, 9, 10 years after I walked off the stage after Mr. Olympia. And I said, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. I went and I got a full physical, CAT scan, everything on my whole entire body. And it took me a long time to do that, but I did. I stepped to the plate. Just Wednesday, we got the results back. And my orthopedic surgeon, he just couldn't believe the scans that had came back because they're absolutely perfect. He says, man, what have you been doing? You got the body, you got the bones of a 24-year-old guy. And I don't know if you guys follow me on social media, but I post that, but it was something that God gave me the sign. He says, you know what? This is a chance, this is the opportunity for you to go out and do something great for the sport. So I decided to come out of retirement, do what I can do best, and take it to the stage at the Mr. Olympia, baby. So I'll see you guys there.
He had requested a special invite to the show, which the IFBB promptly granted due to Kevin's decorated career and legacy. If there was anyone who deserved it, it was him. Everyone was absolutely shook, as the last big name to return after that much time off was Lou Ferrigno. But it was a new age with plenty of new faces, and Kevin was the last person anyone expected to hear was returning to bodybuilding at that point. He was 52 years old, was way past his physical prime, and hadn't really been training at a high level for years. But considering how he responded to gear, the thought of what he might bring to the stage was still exciting for anyone who knew him. Now, despite the excitement and anticipation, conventional wisdom would say that it wasn't realistic to expect too much from Kevin, and most people were wise not to. But Sean Ray did take this up a notch, as he was highly critical of Kevin's return to the bodybuilding stage. And while some saw it as outright hating and negativity, others saw it as Sean looking out for a longtime friend.
Now you want my opinion, I'll give it to you. I think it's a foolish mistake. I think he's underestimating the talent that is there, even though it's not the Hall of Fame quality that he once competed against. He's not Lou Ferrigno at 43 years young, coming back after a 17-year layoff. Coming back to what? For what? You're an entrepreneur with your Levrone signature series. You're a father to your 10-year-old son, Gabriel. You're still an icon in the business. If you really feel this strongly about coming back, come back and do an exhibition tour. But you cannot save people from themselves. When someone's on a mission, I don't want to piss all over his dream. There's a lot of advancements, and so with that, his mindset may still be, I can do it, like a fighter, like a heavyweight fighter, trying to come back. You're slower, but you still think you can take the punches. And I don't want to see Kevin wind up hurt. And if he were ever going to wind up hurt, and I look at Ronnie Coleman as an example, this is the environment that he puts himself in harm's way. As a friend, I'm concerned every day.
But just the idea and prospect of having him there and seeing what he could do built a ton of anticipation and hype nonetheless. And Kevin's reason for coming back to bodybuilding was partly why he got into music. He wanted another challenge, and he wanted to see if he still had it. He also wasn't satisfied with leaving his career the way he did and felt that there was unfinished business between him and the bodybuilding stage. He also made the decision to come back on short notice, only giving himself 6 months to get ready for the show, a very short time frame for such a lengthy layoff. But while his body had changed, his genetics hadn't, so it was going to be very interesting to see Kevin push the bounds of what an old man can do. With the 2016 Olympia just weeks away, the Maryland Muscle Machine was set to return to Vegas. And at the Olympia press conference, he'd go back and forth with Dexter Jackson, who was questioning his ability to be a threat. But Kevin, being the competitor that he was, made him more than willing to flex right then and there, literally.
Kevin coming back is awesome. And I think it's really good for the sport. Really. But, I mean, let's be real. I was whooping Kevin before he retired. Now, I've been competing for 17 years. And for a person to take 13 years off and train for 6 months, that's not, I wasn't worried at all, to be honest. Now, if Kevin took like 3 years of training, then we could talk about 6 months. Come on, man.
Dexter, you want me to take my stuff off? That's what we want to see. Take your shit off.
Hey, this is your moment now, bro.
And we can go right now, most muscle.
See,
you ready?
I want to let you guys know.
Dexter, are you ready?
Hang on a second.
Come on, Kev.
I see a challenge coming on right here, folks. Who wants to see it? Cedric versus Kevin.
Okay, most muscle.
I'm proud of Kevin regardless of what he looks like, because at 52 to come out and look like this, for me, I can already see the legs are undersized. I didn't think it was possible to get the legs back after so many years.
Legs are the first to go, aren't they?
Yes, so it's not Kevin from what we remember.
Right.
I know Kevin better than anybody.
Kevin's played second in this contest several times.
Yes, but it's a good Kevin for 52 years.
The prejudging represented an absolute blast from the past, as Kevin would bless the fans with a moment they never thought they would see again. He came out during the individual routines and hit all of the poses he had perfected and become known for in his career. It was amazing to see him do this at his age. Now, unsurprisingly, he was clearly not the Kevin Levrone of old, especially with his legs having gone completely. His body just couldn't do it at that level anymore, but his ability to muster the energy and grit to get this prep done was truly incredible.
Levrone, the legend, just an absolute legend in the sport. He hasn't competed on an Olympia stage since 2003. He made a comeback at 52 last night. He's out of the top 10, but look at the physique this man brought, not having trained seriously for 13 years. And at 52 years of age, Kevin Levrone, the legend.
He's absolutely the one that made me start training, made me go to the gym.
He didn't feel he went out the way that he wanted to. I think he's going to receive a tremendous applause.
I mean, this is absolutely
he's being respected for the legend.
The right way to
Now, unsurprisingly, Kevin was not competitive enough to make it to the finals, but in a show of respect, the judges did let him return to do his posing routine for the fans one more time. They had even allowed him to pose with the top call-out during the prejudging, undoubtedly making that the highlight of his 2016 Mr. Olympia. And despite being 52, standing next to those young monsters, he shockingly wasn't all that far behind in muscularity in the upper body. It's his lower body that just couldn't hang, but his spirit was fully present. Now, unsurprisingly, Kevin didn't place, but his appearance was an event that stayed in the bodybuilding news cycles for a while. It also brought a lot of publicity to his supplement company and other business ventures. Now, you would think that Kevin would call it quits after this and walk off into the sunset, but he didn't. He wasn't satisfied with the package that he presented at the Mr. Olympia and wanted to give himself a proper send-off in a way that he could be proud of. So he'd spend the next 2 years prepping and preparing for what would eventually be his swan song. This ended up being at the 2018 Arnold Classic Australia, where he placed 13th. This would be the last time we would ever see Kevin Levrone compete on a bodybuilding stage, representing the final page in that chapter of his life. These days, Kevin has been laying low and focused on his family, particularly his son, who he's spending as much time with as possible. He's just as involved in the bodybuilding space as he's ever been, consistently doing interviews with different platforms, and always giving back to the community in any way he can. Just like Ronnie, Mike Menser, and Jay Cutler, Kevin's influence on not just bodybuilding culture, but fitness culture as a whole has been immense. With clips of his old training videos and motivational talks scattered all over TikTok, his legacy continues to live on while inspiring a brand new generation of lifters every single day. He even nabbed a pretty big sponsorship with one of the bigger clothing brands in the bodybuilding space, Darksport. Over the course of Kevin's illustrious career, he competed in 68 IFBB shows, winning 21 of them, and coming in second place 17 times. In his entire bodybuilding career, he only placed outside the top 5 4 times, with 2 of those instances occurring well outside of his prime. In 2001, he even set the record for the most career wins in IFBB history, before it was broken by Ronnie Coleman. Now, despite always being grateful for the opportunities that the Weeders gave him, he has and will always maintain that he should have won the Mr. Olympia at some point in his career. And as anyone who was there to witness Kevin's greatness can attest, he was more than deserving. Despite this though, his spiritual nature has allowed him to come to terms with the idea that winning the title was never in the cards for him. He cites Arnold, Lee Haney, and Lee Labrada as 3 of his biggest inspirations, while citing Dorian, Ronnie, Dexter, and Jay as some of the peers who inspired him the most. While early childhood trauma would stunt a lot of people's development in a lot of ways, Kevin didn't let it hold him back. And instead of having a pessimistic view on life, he chose to see the best in people and the best of every situation. In fact, according to Kevin, he doesn't believe he would have ever become a bodybuilder had he not experienced the loss of his father. His cycles were never extensive, as his genetics and work ethic allowed him to not rely heavily on gear, and he'd get so lean that his jaw muscles would have cuts, characteristics about him that validated that he was just a different breed of bodybuilder from a different time. These days, he still runs Levrone's signature supplements and has been living a relatively quiet life for the most part. But his impact on bodybuilding remains, as he's still to this day widely regarded as the greatest Mr. Olympia who never was, the uncrowned king who was one of the greatest overall artists in the history of bodybuilding. Now, in a bizarre twist of fate, the universe, or destiny, whatever you want to call it, I was wrapping up a phone call at the end of my workout, eager to get home to continue editing this video. The reason why I'm on camera is because I was recording a workout for my second channel, when I casually look to my left and see something on my gym's television that I hadn't seen in the entire time that I've been a member there. A Mock Video Productions workout video of none other than Kevin Levrone. So I immediately got up and knew I had to go and record it. Because for me to see that on the TV for the first time since I've been a member there had to be nothing other than divine intervention. A sign from the bodybuilding gods to continue grinding out this video. Or at least that's how I'd like to interpret it. What can we learn from the life and legacy of Kevin Levrone? It's that trauma and pain can be turned into self-mastery. And that self-mastery, a path to greatness in anything you want to do. And with every roadblock and setback, disappointment and failure, your legacy will eventually become what you decide to make it. I'm Large Kofi. Thank you for watching.